Welcome, everyone. I know you're listening to this story to fall asleep. So before we start, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment where and what time you're watching. Now, get comfortable and relax. Elena Santos traced her fingers along the spine of an ancient tome, feeling the leather pulse beneath her touch like something alive. The binding seemed to breathe under her hands, a subtle rhythm that matched neither her heartbeat nor any earthly tempo. 3 months had passed since she'd answered the peculiar job listing. Apprentice needed. Traditional bookbinding experience required. Must be comfortable with unusual hours and unique materials. Inquire at 17 Corvid Lane. The address had led her to a narrow townhouse wedged between two larger buildings, its windows reflecting light at odd angles. Even now, Elena couldn't quite remember how many floors it had. The architecture seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at it, windows and gables rearranging themselves like words on a page. The man who opened the door, Jaron Tain, looked exactly as she'd imagined a master bookbinder would. Stooped and ink-stained, wearing a leather apron scarred by countless small burns and chemical spills. His eyes, though, held a feverish intensity that should have been her first warning. "You've come highly recommended," he'd said, though Elena hadn't mentioned her application to anyone. "I've been watching your work at the University Bindery. Such careful attention to detail, such reverence for the written word." His voice had carried strange undertones, harmonics that seemed to resonate in her bones. Behind him, shadows moved in ways that defied the light source, and she caught a whiff of something that reminded her of old pond water in decay. The workshop had seemed normal enough at first glance. Worn wooden workbenches, shelves lined with tools and materials, the comforting smell of leather and glue. But as the weeks passed, Elena began noticing things that didn't quite fit. The rulers sometimes measured different lengths depending on the time of day. The awls left holes that sealed themselves when she wasn't looking. And the shadows. The shadows were always deeper than they should be, pooling in corners like black ink. A fragment of poetry had appeared on her workbench one morning, written in Thomas Reed's distinctive hand. "In spaces between bound pages tight, whispers echo from infinite night." The words had seemed to squirm on the paper, and Elena found herself humming their rhythm as she worked, though she couldn't remember consciously reading them. Now, working in his basement workshop by lamplight, Elena understood why he'd valued those qualities. The books that passed through their hands were like nothing she'd encountered in her training. Some were bound in materials she couldn't identify, leather that felt too warm, cloth that seemed to breathe, metal clasps that moved when touched. Others contained text that seemed to shift when viewed directly, letters crawling across pages like insects searching for new arrangements. All of them carried a weight that had nothing to do with their physical mass. Tonight's project sat before her. A stack of loose pages that had arrived in a leather satchel, delivered by Myrold Rook, the keeper of the script. His hands had trembled as he handed over the package, and Elena noticed that his shadow didn't quite match his movements, always a fraction too slow or too fast. "These are special," he'd whispered, glancing nervously at the shadows between the shelves. "The High Scribe herself has marked them for binding. Our patron grows hungry." He'd hesitated then, pulling something else from his satchel, a small envelope sealed with dark wax. The seal bore a symbol that seemed to shift when Elena tried to focus on it. "From Althesa Varen herself," he'd added, his voice barely above a whisper. "She says you're to read it only after you've completed the binding. She saw something about you in her last trance." The pages felt warm to the touch, and the script that crawled across them made her eyes water. Some bore notations in different hands. She recognized Thomas Reed's poetry, interwoven with the main text, his verses speaking of a darkness that devoured light and a horizon where reality ended. Other margins contained desperate warnings in what she now knew to be Miranda Wells' handwriting. The words breed in dreams. They want more than just readers. They want vessels. Elena's fascination warred with her terror. Part of her wanted to run, to forget everything she'd seen and return to the simple work of binding normal books. But another part, growing stronger each day, yearned to understand the mysteries hidden in these impossible texts. The hunger for knowledge had taken root in her mind, and she found herself wondering if this was how Miranda had felt before she disappeared. "Careful with the binding thread," Jaron called from his desk. "These pages like to wander if they're not properly secured." He was hunched over his own work, transcribing text from one volume to another. Elena had noticed that he often worked in his sleep, his hands moving with mechanical precision while his eyes remained closed, lips forming words in languages that hurt her ears. Sometimes she caught glimpses of other figures moving around him in those moments, shadowy forms that vanished when she tried to look at them directly. The thread she used was unlike any she'd worked with before. It seemed to move of its own accord, sometimes anticipating where she needed it to go. It felt warm between her fingers, like it had just been pulled from something living, and she could have sworn she felt a pulse running through it. As she sewed, she realized she wasn't just binding pages together. She was stitching fragments of reality, creating seams between what was and what waited in the spaces between words. As Elena's needle pierced the warm leather binding, the workshop around her suddenly dissolved. The thread between her fingers turned liquid black, running down her hands like ink, and the world shifted. She stood beneath an impossible sky. Where blue should have been, absolute darkness stretched overhead, a void so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. The sun hung low and bloated, transformed into a massive crimson eye that bathed everything in red twilight. Then she saw the figure. Standing at the intersection of 4 streets was a being both terrible and beautiful. Though human in general shape, 4 arms extended from their frame in perfect symmetry. Their eyes were pools of absolute darkness, streaming tears of blood that traced patterns down their cheeks. Upon their forehead, a strange sigil burned with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. With a jolt of recognition, Elena realized it was the same symbol that had sealed Althesa's envelope. The figure raised all 4 arms to the void-black sky. Elena gasped, finding herself back in the workshop, her hands trembling around the half-bound book. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and she quickly wiped it away with her sleeve, trying to steady her breathing. The thread was just thread again, though her fingers still tingled where it had touched them. Making progress? Jaren's voice came from the doorway, making her jump. She hadn't heard him approach. He stood there in his ink-stained apron, looking exactly as he always did, though somehow his shadow seemed darker than usual. "Yes," Elena managed, proud that her voice remained steady despite her racing heart. "The binding is coming along well." She bent her head to her work, hoping he wouldn't notice how her hands shook as she picked up the needle again. Later, while cleaning his tools, Jaren spoke softly, almost to himself. "I was like you once," he said, his voice carrying those strange harmonics. "A simple bookbinder until I understood that some books want more than just to be read. They taught me their language, showed me the spaces between words where truth lives." He turned to her, and for a moment his eyes seemed to contain galaxies. "The Dark One offers knowledge beyond imagining, Elena. The cost—" He smiled, and in the lamplight his teeth gleamed like wet ink. "The cost becomes irrelevant once you understand what waits on the other side of the page." She'd begun having dreams about the books. In them, she watched letters crawl across pages like insects, forming and reforming into messages that left her gasping awake. She dreamed of vast libraries where the shelves went on forever, and all the books whispered her name. Sometimes she heard voices from the workshop below her rented room, though Jaren insisted he never worked past midnight. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper each day, and she often caught movement in them from the corner of her eye, suggestions of figures walking between the shelves, of hands reaching out from between books. Through these dreams, she began to understand the congregation's structure. Jaren, as the bound archivist, created gateways through his bindings. Myrald Rook, the nervous keeper, distributed the texts to those marked for initiation. Above them both stood Althesa Veron, the High Scribe, who received direct instructions from their patron, the Dark One itself. In these dreams, fragments of what she'd glimpsed haunted her: the void black sky, the crimson sun that shouldn't be, and always that figure, that terrible, magnificent figure whose presence made reality shiver. Her mind recoiled from remembering too much, but the images lingered like after-images burned into her vision. Sometimes when she woke, gasping in the dark, she could still feel the weight of that impossible sky pressing down on her, and her fingers would trace patterns in the air, unconsciously mimicking the sigil she'd seen burning on the figure's brow. A loose page fluttered from the stack. She recognized the university library stamp, though the seal seemed wrong somehow, rotating slowly when she wasn't looking directly at it. The margin contained a neat notation: found by M.W. Below that, another hand had added, processed for distribution. M. Rook. Elena had heard whispers about Miranda Wells, the librarian who had vanished from Blackmere University. Some said she'd simply left town, but Elena had seen other notes in her handwriting, growing increasingly frantic, speaking of words that bred in dreams and truths that devoured readers. As Elena reached for the page, her sleeve pulled back, revealing the strange marks that had begun appearing on her skin. They looked like ink stains at first, but they moved slightly when she slept, forming letters and alphabets that had never existed in any earthly language. She'd stopped trying to wash them off after noticing that soap and water only made them spread faster. Sometimes, in the right light, they seemed to form words from the texts she'd been binding, prophecies and promises that wrote themselves into her flesh. "You're progressing well," Jaren said, suddenly behind her, though she hadn't heard him move. His shadow on the wall didn't match his movements, and Elena noticed that his apron now bore stains that seemed to gleam with their own inner light. "Soon, you'll be ready to begin the real work." When he smiled, his teeth looked too sharp, too numerous, as if his mouth contained several sets that shifted and changed when he spoke. The realization hit her then. She wasn't just binding books anymore. Each stitch, each carefully aligned page, was helping to bind something larger, reality itself. The books were merely vessels, channels through which something vast and hungry could reach into the world. And she, with her careful stitches and precise alignments, was helping to create the perfect gateway. "There's a gathering tonight," Jaren continued, his voice carrying those strange harmonics that made her bones vibrate. "The Dark One wishes to see your work." He gestured to a bookshelf that Elena could have sworn hadn't been there a moment ago. Few apprentices progressed so quickly to drawing its attention. The shelf held copies of Thomas Reed's latest works, their spines gleaming with an inner light. Elena had helped bind some of them herself, using thread that moved like living things, and leather that felt too warm to the touch. She'd seen how the text changed between readings, how the words rearranged themselves to reveal new horrors to each reader. "The congregation welcomes those who understand the true power of words," Jaren said, producing a small, leather-bound volume from his pocket. "This was your first binding with us. I think you're ready to read it now." The book felt heavy in Elena's hands, its cover warm and slightly yielding, like skin. The pages, when she opened them, contained text in her own handwriting, words she didn't remember writing, describing things she couldn't possibly have seen. Horror and fascination warred within her as she read. Part of her wanted to throw the book aside, to run from the workshop and never look back. But a deeper part, the part that had always loved the secret worlds hidden between pages, understood that she had already chosen her path. Like Miranda Wells before her, like Thomas Reed with his dark verses, she had been drawn into something larger than herself. Elena's hands moved automatically, continuing their work even as her mind reeled from these revelations. The thread wove patterns that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space, binding not just paper and leather, but something else, something that pulsed with ancient hunger. She was no longer just binding books. She was binding realities together, creating gateways between what was and what waited in the spaces between words. Through the basement window, she could see fog gathering in the street, forming shapes that reminded her of letters in a cosmic alphabet. Somewhere in that mist, she knew, other members of the congregation of the Whispering Page were preparing for tonight's ceremony. The bookseller who'd given her the mysterious job listing, the nervous keeper who brought them pages, the poet whose words now crawled across her skin in her sleep. As she completed the final binding, Elena understood at last what Miranda's notes had meant. The words didn't just want to be read, they wanted to be bound, to be given form and substance in our world. With trembling fingers, she reached for Althesa's envelope, breaking the shifting seal. Inside was a single page of thick paper, covered in elegant script that seemed to write itself as she watched. "You've seen it now, haven't you, Elena? The truth waiting in the dark sky. The figure that bridges worlds. We each play our part in what's to come. You with your bindings, me with my visions, Jaren with his translations. The Dark One chooses us carefully, dear Elena. Your hands know the work already, even if your mind hasn't caught up. Bind these pages well. They're more important than you yet realize." Elena's fingers traced the binding she'd just completed, feeling the warmth pulsing beneath the leather. Horror and fascination mingled in her chest, but underneath them both was something else, a deep, thrumming certainty. Every book she'd bound had been a practice run for this moment. Every stitch had taught her hands the patterns they would need. She could run, yes, but the truth was, she didn't want to. The black horizon was coming, and Elena Santos, once a simple bookbinder, would help usher it in, one bound volume at a time. Her hands moved across the leather and paper, each stitch drawing the darkness closer, each page carrying whispers of the truth that waited in the spaces between words. And in the shadows of the workshop, the Dark One watched her work with hungry anticipation, its patience measured in the slow turning of pages and the endless whisper of ancient prophecies. Abigail Mitchell and the Honeygreen Ghost. Abigail walked through the wetness of the trees and grass of the woods. Her task completed, she looked for a place to rest. The gash on her side would need a few minutes to heal fully. The process had begun already. She would need to buy some new clothes as well. She smiled to herself as the rain wet her skin and the thunder soothed her mood. "Ah, there we go," she said, looking at the small clearing. It would do. It was maybe 10 meters from the river, perhaps a swim later. For now, she just wanted some rest. She took her time picking some rocks and sticks to make a fire. There wasn't much that was dry out here, but it mattered little. She placed the surrounding rocks carefully, creating a fire pit. She knelt on the almost muddy ground and set to work, placing the somewhat wet and outright wet sticks and twigs underneath her makeshift fire hood. Closing her eyes, she put both hands over the sticks and helped them to dry faster. She then took the index and middle fingers of her left hand and placed them within the carefully laid mess of twigs. They glowed. As she rubbed, the sticks' flames came to life. She then took her bag off her shoulders and pulled out 2 dead squirrels. The veins in her right hand now glowed as she rubbed it over each squirrel, removing the top layer of fur and placing them over the fire. Her guest would arrive soon, so she sat leaning against a rock. This was her favorite type of weather. It cooled her and soothed her. She waited, patiently waited. She had heard tales of the Honeygreen Ghost, the so-called boogeyman of the Algonquin Highlands of Ontario, Canada. Beings like her always attracted each other. It's kind of like how singular animals could always find another like it when the time comes. Sometimes it was stories of each other that brought them together. Sometimes a new report or sighting was enough. Word of mouth was the most common method. But then again, it could be the weather. What Abby hated was when it involved other humans. Those tended to go in ways she oftentimes regretted. She enjoyed meeting things like her, or kind of like her. She wasn't actually sure just how human she actually was anymore. But friends and family often kept her grounded. She figured she'd wait as long as it took. Honeygreen would find her eventually. She checked the squirrels and decided to snack. Ripping off a small bit, she tossed it towards the ground. It vanished just before hitting the ground, then appeared again, flying in another direction. "Please explain to me, why do I keep trying to feed you?" she said, smirking as one good feline eye appeared for the briefest of instances, then vanished again. What did I do to deserve to be haunted by you? Eat the squirrel, she stated, adding, it'll give your fur some color, maybe. Laying back against the rocks, she closed her eyes and hummed lightly to herself, placing her arms behind her head. The gash on her side was slowly closing, as if in tune with the humming. Even the thing crawled its invisible self onto her lap and rested as it finished the meat. For a while she hummed as the rain fell over her, but soon enough she perked up as she heard the cracking of leaves and the crunch and wetness of the grass. "Pardon," came a raspy, whispered voice. Abby turned a glowingly warm palm toward the tall and skeletal ghostly thing. She held her hand out to it. "Come, the fire's warm, and I can use the company," she said. The creature was swathed in clothing as if to hide its features. It eyed Abby's hand and the flames, sensing the oneness of each, separate but the same. Its lanky frame and much too long limbs moved closer, dropping to all fours and moving in like a dog. "Come on, then," Abby stated, pointing at the other squirrel on the spit. "That one's yours. I figured you'd be a mite hungry when you got here." Honeygreen moved closer to the fire and sat across from her, smiling as best it could. Its oversized jaws drooled at the sight of the squirrel. Abby nodded, and the creature snatched the squirrel from the spit, ravaging it. Its skeletal teeth chattered after swallowing the animal whole. Honeygreen let out an airy sound of satisfaction. The sound would make the blood run cold in most people, not used to seeing or dealing with the fantastical, or the horror of such a creature. "Taste good?" Abby quizzed. "Delicious," it said in a breathy tone, sitting lotus style. "Thank you for the fire and the food. I hunger often. I am frequently cold, but this evening, in this rain, you have warmed me more than I've been warmed in ages," Honeygreen stated, glaring at her. It did not mean this to be intimidating, but it was the only way it could look at a person. It was part of the curse from the Highland spirits. "Worry not, I'm frequently too warm, but I try hard to never miss a meal. There's only one thing, though," she began, adding, "why doesn't Canada believe in cheesesteaks?" Honeygreen's body attempted a grotesque mockery of a laugh, and Abby joined in. It lifted a clothed, swaddled, bony hand towards her. "For your kindness and warmth, I will repay you the only way I know how," it said, moving closer. Abby made no move to defend herself, and the invisible cat on her lap yawned in boredom. Why it needed to yawn in the first place was unknown. "I will tell you a campfire tale, a tale of terror, needless revenge, and my part in it," it said through chattering teeth. Abigail's eyes glowed with anticipation. "I'd like that very much," she stated, placing her hand on the creature's sorry excuse for a leg. But as she did so, its chattering teeth slowed as it felt the warmth. She knew it would speak more smoothly this way. Honeygreen appeared to be in a state of ecstasy as it breathed out again. "Listen carefully, for this story is true as your hand on my leg," it began. "Across that river is where fate had chosen the actors for the play that came to the Highlands that night." Honeygreen stared into Abigail's eyes. She knew that since it was a spirit, there would be no looking away as he told his tale. That was a quirk of so-called undeath. But it didn't bother Abigail in the slightest. As a wandering spirit, I spend much of my days in search of food and warmth. I crave it. I need it. It is part of the curse I am under from the spirits of these woods for my crime," Honeygreen said. "I wander during the day and night. It matters not. My search always continues. However, when I have not had the warmth or food I need, I will sleep. I know not for how long, but if the heat of a campfire is near, I shall resume my search. I will move towards that fire as if a mosquito, to a bare neck," it continued. "It was after one of these long sleeps that I awakened to sensing a great flame. Even from so far away it beckoned me, and I lusted for it. It was night as I began my movement towards the flames. When I closed upon the campfire, the curse pushed me to seek the permission of the occupants, but my mouth remained closed, and I remained in the foliage observing. What Honeygreen was witnessing was not just a campfire. It was looking at what appeared to be a sacrifice. Its lust for the flames and the food had drowned out the words being spoken. It closed on the scene. At the campsite of the ritual were 5 people, 2 males and 3 women, each standing on the tip of a star-shaped diagram on the ground. There was a large fire pit in the middle of the star, and 5 smaller fires near the feet of each person. Each of them wore clothing with strange markings. They chanted in unison, each holding a unique object, waving them back and forth towards, and then away from the flames. A moment later, each stopped, and it grew quiet. Honeygreen then noted the silence about it. The creatures of the wood were used to its presence, and it had never harmed them, so the threat was not there, and there was no need to be silent. But this night they are deathly quiet. "Bring forth the sacrifice," the woman at the tip of the star called out. 2 other participants went to the vehicle and pulled out a now muffled, but screaming man. He wriggled and tried hard to pull away, but was helpless. The 2 ritualists held him in place as he whimpered. "Bring forth the witness," she again called out. The other 2 participants went to the vehicle and pulled out another muffled and crying man. The results were the same. Helpless, he could only watch as they moved the other man towards the fire pit. "Remove the blindfold and gag from the sacrifice," she commanded. The man immediately begged and cried for his life. "Please don't do this. I can give you whatever you want. I have money. I have shit. That just don't kill me. Please. I don't deserve this. I did nothing to you people." He cried to the impassionate masked faces. "Remove the gag from the witness." Again, she commanded. "What the fuck is wrong with you people?" He cried out in a mix of terror and rage, tears dropping from his puffy eyes. "Help me, man. Don't let them kill me, dude." The sacrifice called to the witness. I'm sorry," the witness whispered out, trying to look away, but the woman and man held him firm. "Now let us continue. Move the sacrifice towards the flame," she commanded. The sacrifice struggled hard against the man and the woman, but to no avail. They moved him to within 2 meters of the flame exactly. Then they released him. The man's instinct to run took over, and he tried. But his legs disobeyed his mind. Something unseen held him fast. "Move the witness to his position." The witness, also 2 meters away from the pit, eyed the sacrifice. Each man faced each other in the arms of the star. Knowing they were both helpless and likely doomed, they did a very human thing. Tears flooded both men's eyes, with rage empowering the witness's tears. Sheldon, the sacrifice said, visibly shaking. "Rick!" the witness cried out, trying to look away, but his head was held by that same invisible force. "Now take your positions. We have the rage of the witness and the hopelessness of the sacrifice. We continue." The 2 other women stood behind Rick and Sheldon. The men stood at the feet of the star and resumed chanting, while the priestess performed the ritual. Sgoueddslk, pronounced Suged Silk. "I summon you, you who caused dread in ancient times, you who fill children's sleep with nightmares, you who can kill our enemies and suffer no retaliation, you of the flames of revenge and pain, bringer of terror, come forth," she cried. "Take your sacrifice, Skuedslok, as innocent eyes witness your arrival, Skuedslok." Honeygreen could feel another just like it, as it made its presence on this plane known. It noticed the fire pit grow larger. As it did, its hunger for the flames grew in scale, but it could resist only barely. The flames formed tendrils snaking towards Sheldon as he cried in pain. His shins and feet burned from the contact. They pulled him closer to the pit slowly, as if feeding off not only his flesh, but his fear. Rick could only watch in horror as Sheldon reached the middle, and the flames cascaded and flowed up and over his body. It took mere seconds for him to be immolated. He screamed as he died. Emerging from the ruins of his body stood a tall, wiry, grotesque thing that resembled a mix of a human and a salamander. Reddish-black skin, charcoal-black eyes, reptilian facial features. It screeched a yawn, as though bored by the summoning. It turned to look at the witness as the flames flowed over its body. This had proven too much for Honeygreen, and it made its way towards the ritual as fast as its lanky form could take it. Its craving for the warmth had now overridden its curiosity. Skudsluk spoke to Rick, who trembled in fear as it looked at them. "Well done, witness. I haven't tasted rage such as yours in a very long time. If you survive this night, let that stick with you," it said, poking him in the chest, its taloned finger slightly puncturing and burning his flesh. Rick screamed. "I apologize. I forget humans are not very durable." It chuckled thickly. "Now to my summoners. I am yours to command. What would you have me do in this drab world of yours? Who do you want dead?" The woman at the head of the star moved forward, offering praises as she did so. "Mighty Skowdsluk, as your mistress, I command you to—" She never got the chance to finish as Honeygreen emerged from the woods, crawling swiftly as a spider on all fours towards the fire. "Pardon, may I join you?" Honeygreen called out. "Who dares?" Skowdsluk snarled. "What the hell?" one ritualist shouted. "Oh no!" called another, and as he moved, he scuffed the protective star just enough. Skowdsluk quickly turned to face his now terrified mistress, for she knew what that meant. The barrier was gone. It freed the beast. "You would dare summon another to ambush me?" It snarled at her. "No," she cried out. "I don't know what that thing even is. Oh, mighty—" "Silence," it said, plunging a taloned finger through the sides of her mouth. Honeygreen just stood there, drawing in as much of the heat as it could. Skowdsluk could feel the impossible cold of the thing. Thinking it was being attacked by the other demon, it lashed out at its summoners. Long talons gored the panicked woman where Sheldon stood. It peeled her open from stomach to sternum. The other woman fled into the woods. Spinning, it then sliced the first man's head from his body in a jagged mess of blood and gore. The other fled in the woman's direction. Rick could only watch, as he felt like his mind was about to snap from the events before him. All he had done was take the wrong turn last night. Just a wrong turn. A stupid wrong turn. Skowdsluk bent towards him. "You, witness, you are free. I still smell vengeance and rage in you," it said before pulling his talon from the mistress's face. She fell to the ground, clutching her pierced jaws in pain. Skowdsluk took the same dagger-length talon and pulled it painfully from its hand. "I cannot leave this spot, but you can. You kill them for me, boy. You make them suffer for what they did to both of us. Then you bring that talon back to this fire and throw it in, and I'll know the deed is done and nothing like me will ever bother you again." Rick felt freed of whatever force held him. He shakily took the talon and felt the energy flow into his body, as if the dagger possessed him. He looked at the now pitiful, whimpering mistress. "No, witness, she is mine. For her crime, death is too kind. Now go," Skowdsluk commanded. The mistress screamed as her summoned beast snatched her and glowered into her terrified eyes. Skowdsluk smiled a toothy grin. "Death is far too good for you. I do have something else in mind, however." It then turned to look at Honeygreen with a mix of disgust and hatred. Honeygreen simply nodded, tipping its hat. "Thank you kindly for the fire and company." Saying nothing, Skowdsluk pulled itself and the screaming woman into the pit. "I'm not sure how much time had passed, but the boy returned," Honeygreen said. "He still had the talon in his hands. It was covered in blood. So I guess—" Honeygreen's teeth chattered as though cold. He was, as in her excitement at the story, she had removed her hand. She quickly placed it back on him. "I guess he had gotten his revenge. The flames were still high as I sat there watching him. He wasn't scared of me. He'd seen worse that night. He took the talon and tossed it in the flame, then sat down." Abigail cocked her head to the side and quizzed Honeygreen. "Honeygreen, I thought you said this was a tale of needless revenge." "It was," Honeygreen stated. He opened his coat and revealed bloody swaths of human skin. He opened it further to reveal a tattoo on the skin. "That tattoo belonged to the boy, Rick," it stated. Oh no, Abigail said in genuine concern. Why? Part of my curse is to harm no one sharing their campfire with me while they are awake. I see, Abigail said, solemnly. The twist of the tale hits her. Well, it was a hell of a story. If you had told that tale to certain other types of people, they'd be trying to destroy you right now. But I see the spirits of these woods have rules, and you followed them. Honeygreen tipped his hat. Yes, ma'am. Honeygreen rose. I'll be going now, it said. Oh, no, Abigail said, increasing the warmth her body put out. Honeygreen salivated. Sit! I told you I could use the company, she stated. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and it's a doozy. Abigail started. It's about the Fae, a smoke monster, and a kid who won the lottery. You don't need to know me. All you need to know is, I know something. Something I shouldn't. It's not mine to tell, but I don't think dead girls complain much. I see through her eyes, I feel that same pain. More than a memory, I live in the moments, every second of every day. I have never been religious, but I pray to whatever will listen. I will tell her story. I know I have to. I don't know why, but someone has to hear her story. Just promise you won't leave me. We'll stay together, all right? Yeah, whatever. I promise, she said as she slid her uniform off. I sat waiting, having already changed out of my work clothes the second my shift ended. Working in the theater had some perks, but it was hardly worth smelling like popcorn butter after. Rachel put perfume over the smell, but I showered after every shift. My hair was still damp as proof. Do you need anything before we leave? She asked, pulling clothes out of her bag to change into. Probably, I joked, trying to break my own tension. But it's my house, so if it's that important, I'll notice it on my way out. She laughed, buttoning the last of 4 buttons on her jeans. Then she threw on a tight ringer t-shirt. Previously it had some sort of image, but it had worn away with time, leaving it difficult to make out. I dressed nearly the opposite, with a plaid yellow skirt and matching button-up top. A brown belt, with a gold shining buckle and hoop earring to match. We weren't the type to be friends, really. We shouldn't have been. Work does that, brings different types of people together. Rachel hopped off the edge of my bed, grabbing her bag off my floor. She started out my door, forgetting her keys on my nightstand. Rachel, I laughed, picking up the keys and following her out. You won't make it far without these. She smiled, took the keys, and continued without a word. Her car was parked on the sidewalk in front of my house. I was never good with cars, but I knew for sure it was black. I think it was a Cutlass, but I wouldn't bet on it. She got into the driver's seat, but I didn't want to get in with her. I did, against my better judgment, and then we left. The drive there was odd. Even Main Street had no traffic, leaving it a graveyard of stoplights and fallen leaves. Fog, blocking our view from every direction, growing thicker and thicker the further out of town we went. It should be expected with the carnival, but this felt different. I twiddled my thumbs, pretending as though I had nothing to worry about. You okay? Rachel asked, not taking her attention off the road. She always pointed out my little quirks, usually noticing if I was feeling off. I squeaked, snapping out of whatever trance I was in. I was, obviously, not okay. Rachel glanced over. She looked so calm and relaxed. You sure? You look hella tense. I didn't answer. Cool air flooded in through Rachel's window, letting the smoke off her cigarette float out. Flickering neon lights stopped her before she could push any further. The lights lured us into an open field-turned parking lot, like an anglerfish lures its prey. The old beauty, suffocated by the call of humming engines. The funhouse hung upon the gateway. I fumbled for the door handle, unable to muster up the strength to get it open. Vision fuzzy, heart pounding, and a headache I couldn't seem to shake off. Managing to get the door open, I tumbled out. It was too much. The lights, the laughing, the small, crowded paths. But a calm smile and happy voice were as good of an act as the rest of the circus. I had never snuck out before, let alone to a place so big. I was my parents' ideal child, and I loved it. The way every adult mentioned me as a role model, it kept me going, like a push I needed to function. Without approval, I didn't have much, which I think is why I came here tonight. Rachel grabbed my arm, pulling me towards the ring toss. "Would you be careful?" I begged as she pulled me past a girl, nearly sending her flying. Looking at the girl, she was younger, maybe 10 or 11. She looked odd. There was no other way to describe it. She dressed as though a few years behind style. A pale, multicolored striped shirt and bright blue pants. Fee had a microvision. They stopped making those back in 1981. I know that because Lance can't help but bring it up whenever he can. That is only 3 years ago, though, so it's not too odd she has one. Looking around, everyone looked a few years behind. It was uncanny, but perhaps it was just my wild imagination. Rachel didn't seem to notice. Maybe it was nothing to worry about. Trying to find a good distraction, we played every game in reach. We, of course, won nothing. In the carnival, the house always wins. A blaring announcement shook my attention away from the horse race I had been playing. The show will commence in 10 minutes. 10 minutes, droned the announcer. Stock up on snacks, carnival trinkets, and secure a prime seat. And of course, don't forget to enjoy the show. His tone implied that the enjoyment part was optional, but the snacks and trinkets were not. Rachel again grabbed my wrist, pulling me towards the tent. "Come on, we have to get in before the show starts." My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps as I stumbled after her. Sweat, grease, and other smells didn't help my nerves. The air inside the tent was too thick to breathe. Without hesitation, Rachel threw herself towards the stairs, dragging me up behind her. Our feet pounded a rhythm against the weathered boards. I held my breath, begging myself not to feel sick. I failed. Watery vomit splattered against the wooden steps. "Whoa." She let go of my hand, covering her own mouth as if she might as well be sick too. "Are you sure you're all right?" I choked on my words. I wasn't all right. "Yeah," I managed, before continuing up the stairs. It was too late to back out now. We stumbled over feet trying to find open seats, but eventually we found what seemed to be the last two in the tent. As if time itself were waiting for us, the show started. The music swelled, and the crowd erupted into cheers as the lights dimmed like embers in a dying fire pit. A single ray guided the eyes of the crowd toward the center of the ring. Then you saw him, one of the many clowns. He could have passed for ordinary, but he had long lost that privilege. A nice white button-up shirt, offset by his bright red pants and bow tie to match. His proportions were all wrong, like a child's drawing of a person. He had prosthetics. They were wooden, all different shades and types. Like he was made purely by the creator's twisted euphoria for torture. The effect? Like a train wreck you couldn't look away from. "Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to the fun house." He cheered, arms waving through the air like a weird vintage cartoon character. His tone was weirder, like a voice box, barely matching his mouth as he spoke. It didn't fit him. It was pitchy, too high, as if he'd sucked all the helium from a balloon. "Here is where your dreams come true. Just wait. You'll see wonders of the world, mysteries never to be answered, and the most incredible tricks performed by our amazing actors. Now give a round of applause for the dancers." He stepped back and the stage darkened, as if he were the light keeping it lit. As if they had been there the whole time, they began their dance, like shining dots in the dark, all emitting a light of their own. Their motions pulled the audience into awe. Dark blue leotards tightly clung to their bodies, black ruffles dancing beneath their skirts, defying gravity, every leap just moments too long. Their ruffled skirts gave the effect of a black swan leaping from water, beautiful dark red ribbons in hand, the shade of long oxidized blood. They spun through hoops so quickly they sparked. Contrast to the world of the carnival, they were angels. After they finished their dance, they seemed to vanish. The ring, now lit up, showed 4 large trapeze ropes and 2 poles on opposite sides, stalking the stage for the next who dared to take its place. The additional lighting showed how large the tent really was. It hadn't appeared this big on the outside, only a few 100 feet. Looking at it now, it had to be at least 1,000 feet around, maybe more. A young woman and man climbed up on opposite platforms. Their eyes locked. They had similar attire to the dancers, but no skirts or ribbons to match. They looked similar, both slim brunette-haired. What I can only guess were siblings. They stood still for a moment, as if waiting for some sort of introduction. Without one, she stepped backwards to get a running start and dove. Her hands slammed against the bar, gripping tight as she swung towards her male counterpart. Time seemed to slow. She looked so focused, so certain. She trusted her every move, and her partner just as much. As she neared him, the lights cut, drenching the world in dim, red darkness. Silence. It's frightening. The world isn't meant to be quiet. Silence is predator stalking prey. It's calm before the storm. Silence is pain in the making. A scream. The kind you hear in nightmares. One that speaks a million words, hopes, and dreams, crushing them all in a second. Without words, you could still hear her plea. Screaming is the one language everyone speaks. The lights snapped back on, but the scream didn't stop. The tent shuddered with the silence of the audience, only the screaming. Looking around, they were gone. Even the male trapeze had vanished, just like everyone else, disappeared to dirt across the floor, and the fear that she might not be alone. Looking ahead, she saw her, crushed by the pressure of her fall, the last moments of terror still frozen in her eyes, limbs twisted in each direction, like a gory broken compass guiding me nowhere. The dirt beneath her, a damp red, her corpse still screaming, the first normal scream mine. Frozen in place, everything seemed to unfold before me like a movie, and for a moment I prayed I was a part of the narrative. My knees gave way, sending me to the floor, barely leaving me conscious through the fear-induced nausea. It was too sudden, too real. The woman's screaming continued, beyond what her crushed torso should have allowed. Blood gurgled up her throat, slowly muffling her agony. Leaning my shaking body against a chair, I looked towards where the door was. It had vanished, with no trace left behind, as if it had never been there at all. I looked around and saw what I should have known far before. There was no way out. Running down the stairs, I slipped and was reminded of my fear-induced vomit, now covering my yellow skirt. Nearing the bottom of the steps, I stopped. A sound echoed throughout the air, stopping me in my tracks, skittering on the roof. Then I saw it. It tore through the roof of the tent with ease, but no light came in. A dark shade of gray-brown, 50, maybe 60 feet long, wrapping itself around the poles holding the place up. 10 long spider-like limbs stuck randomly to the body, as if added as an afterthought, all shifting as if they had minds of their own. 2 sockets where the eyes should have been, pulling the skin around them in like a black hole. Its smile, grotesque and mangled, the ends wrapped around edges of its head, showing horribly large, sharpened human teeth. Moving faster than my eyes could catch up with, it darted toward me. I dropped back to the floor. Sliding down the stairs, I scratched any available surface of skin. It slammed into the steps above me and crawled down right past me. It couldn't see. I crawled along the seat bottoms, shaking every second I wasn't pressed to the floor. It may not have been able to see me, but it could hear my every breath. After more than an hour of crawling, hiding, holding my breath, and repeating that vicious cycle, I reached a curtain. Barely open enough for me to fit through silently, I crawled in. Too frightened to breathe. For the fear it might hear me, I ran further inside. Hardly seeing where I was going, I ran in and out of every curtain and opening, praying for an escape. Each direction I tried left me more and more hopeless. After many failed attempts at tearing through the tent and looking behind every crate and rack I could find, I crumbled to the floor. Tears streamed down my cheeks. I hadn't taken the time to realize what really was destined to happen. I was not going to escape. I was stuck here, to rot away or die to that horrible monster outside this curtain. I had so much left to do. I wasn't ready to die. The thoughts hurt, and I pressed my nails into my palm. No one had a way with life like she did, floating through the world as if harm never glanced her way. Now harm did more than glance. It was pricking at her skin, drawing closer and closer. I heard it scurry across the ground outside. It hadn't forgotten I was there. I pressed my nails deeper into my skin, drawing blood. It wasn't good, but it took the pain in my head away, helping me focus my brain on something other than fear I couldn't control. Through my blurred vision, I saw a slightly open crate I was too panicked to notice before. Wiping my eyes, I walked over. Sliding the lid off, I looked inside. Human-sized doll parts, some wooden, others porcelain, like those on the clown from the start of the show. I picked one up to look at, just to see what they were. It was hollow. I slid the arm over my own, putting each finger into the correct slot. A perfect fit. The porcelain was cold on my skin, but the freckles dotted on it seemed to match my own. Each finger was built to bend, carefully crafted as if put together by hand. Moving my arm was comfortable, as if it was made for me. Putting it back, I stepped quietly back towards my spot on the floor. Then I felt it. Something moved from out in the ring. I stepped towards the curtain, making sure to stay out of sight of the thing I knew was out there. I glanced out into the dark, not wanting to see it looking back at me. A dim ray from the torn roof was the only light. In that light were scattered chairs, one of the trapeze poles, now broken, and the door. The same as how it had been before, as if it had never left. Without thought, I ran. My shoes pounded the dirt, echoes following me like bees to flowers. I was so close, close to safety, freedom, to the life I feared I'd lose tonight. Hope struck my heart. What strikes harder than hope? Something sharp. Just seconds away from the door, my stomach dropped. I was jerked back, my limbs crunched together by the grip of that thing. Mustering my last bit of strength, I got one look at it. Him. One. He looked human, more than he had before, almost as if turning more human as he watched me suffer. Then, my soon-to-be lifeless body was gouged into a broken trapeze pole. Slow, steady, dripping. Blood. My breathing labored through my punctured lungs. It hurt, not like you'd imagine. Like swallowing chlorine at the pool, the choking, nausea, all the same. But it wasn't as quick. It lingered, like vinegar on my tongue. "Goodbye, Marilyn," a voice walking towards me. Rachel, my co-worker, classmate, someone I considered my friend. Rachel stared at my dying body, and I realized she had no choice. She was a puppet, doing as she was told. I saw it, the way she bowed her head. She didn't really want this, but I couldn't form the words to convince her otherwise. Marilyn's breathing slowed. Maybe she had been hallucinating, maybe not. But in her last moments, I swear I saw her killer become man. Then her breath grew slower and slower, until it stopped. "Good," the man said, as he lifted her corpse off of the pole. Her limbs drooped as blood coated her skin. "You will remain here until we find him. Do I make myself clear, Rachel?" Her head nodded in compliance, her voice hardly above a whisper. "Of course, Father. My work has been done." He had good plans for her body, stitching her wounds, removing limbs to make place for those same antique toy parts she had seen before, predicting her own demise, her eyes sewn open, dark blue buttons in their place. Marilyn, a name of the past, a life left behind, a new name, but the same old girl. Madame Louiselle, the marionette doll. And I don't know who she is, and I don't know why I know her story, but whoever she may be, God have mercy on Marilyn Jury. Sarah hadn't meant to answer the 3:03 a.m. call. The graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions was usually quiet, just the occasional insomnia-driven complaint about defective appliances or billing errors. She'd taken the night shift 6 months ago, after David's death. The late-night hours helped her avoid the morning phone calls from well-meaning friends. their awkward condolences about her fiancé's sudden passing just weeks before their wedding. The ring she couldn't bring herself to remove caught the fluorescent light as she stared at line 3's blinking indicator. Just yesterday, she'd found David's last voicemail on her old phone. "Hey, love, running late at St. Augustine's. Had to help Father Michael with some paperwork for the ceremony. The old guy's intense about marriage vows, but I guess that's why everyone says his couples last forever, right? See you at home." She never saw him again. Later that night, she dreamt of David standing at their planned wedding altar, his ring glowing like a coal. "Forever," he'd whispered, his voice layered with others, "isn't long enough." She'd woken to find their wedding invitation charred at the edges, though she hadn't kept any in the apartment. Something stirred in her memory. An old story her grandmother used to tell about midnight phone calls from the dead, how they'd beg you to stay on the line just a little longer, just a few more precious moments of connection. Sarah had dismissed those tales until the night after David's funeral, when her phone rang at midnight. She'd rushed to answer it, heart pounding, but there was only static. Her fingers moved before her brain could stop them. "Thank you for calling MCS. This is Sarah. How may I assist you today?" The line crackled. At first, she thought it was interference, but then she heard them. Two voices, barely above a whisper, speaking in perfect unison. The sound made her skin prickle, like ice forming on a window pane. "My love, my eternal love." Sarah's chest tightened. The voices were tender, intimate, but wrong. Each syllable seemed stretched, distorted, as if the speakers were being slowly torn apart, even as they reached for each other. She thought of taffy being pulled, of sinews stretching past their breaking point. "I'm sorry, I'm having trouble hearing you clearly. Could you please..." "Forever and ever and ever and ever." The whispers grew more urgent, more agonized. Sarah's hand trembled as she reached for the supervisor alert button. That's when she heard it, the third voice. It didn't come through the phone's speaker, but seemed to resonate directly in her bones, ancient and terrible as church bells at midnight. "Enough!" The line went dead, leaving behind the scent of burnt roses and copper. "You answered it, didn't you?" Marcus, the shift supervisor, stood in her cubicle doorway, his dark skin ashen in the fluorescent lighting. "The 303 call." His hands were shaking as he clutched his coffee cup, and Sarah noticed old burn marks around his wrists, like someone had once bound him with rings of fire. Sarah nodded, still shaking. What was that?" Marcus sank into the spare chair beside her desk, the plastic creaking under his weight. "It started 3 months ago. Always the same time. Always line 3. Jenny Thompson was the first to answer it." He paused, running a hand over his face. "She disappeared the next day. Car in the parking lot, purse on her desk, just gone. But she left something behind, a single black rose, its petals burnt around the edges, and a wedding ring that was hot to the touch." "And the others?" "2 more, both gone within 24 hours of answering." He leaned forward, voice dropping. "We tried everything. Call tracking, recording devices, bringing in the police, but the number changes every time, and the recordings, they're just static, except ... He glanced around nervously. "Except when you play them backward. Then you hear wedding bells and screaming." Marcus rolled up his sleeves, revealing the full extent of the burn marks. They weren't random. They formed perfect circles, like wedding bands seared into flesh. "I tried to help one of the couples," he whispered. "Last month, I heard the whispers coming from the break room. Found 2 of our day shift workers, Amy and Michael, just engaged, holding hands and walking toward the exit like sleepwalkers. I grabbed them, tried to pull them apart." His voice cracked. "The rings of fire just appeared, burning into my skin. When I came to, they were gone. Their bodies turned up 3 days later in front of St. Augustine's, still holding hands, their fingers fused together." Sarah glanced at her watch. 3:47 a.m. "Why hasn't anyone shut down the line?" "Management tried, disconnected all the phones at 3 a.m. for a week. Marcus's eyes darted to the ceiling cameras. The calls came through anyway, and now they're getting more frequent. Last night, line 3 lit up at 9 p.m. I answered it myself, but hung up before they could finish. Been feeling burning in my wrists ever since. Sarah shouldn't have come back the next night, but rent was due and good jobs were scarce. Besides, she told herself, lightning never strikes twice. But as she drove to work, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was following her. Every red light showed a glimpse of robed figures in her rearview mirror. Every passing church seemed to toll its bells in greeting. At 3:03 a.m., all the phones went dead except line 3. She stared at the blinking light, remembering Marcus's warning. But something nagged at her. Those voices weren't threatening. They sounded trapped, desperate, like lovers reaching across an impossible divide, burning for one last touch. The light kept blinking. Sarah pulled up the call center's database, her hands trembling as patterns emerged. 3 disappearances, all after 3:03 a.m. calls. But what about the calls no one answered? As she dug deeper, phones began to ring and die around her like distant wedding bells. In the flickering fluorescent light, shadows gathered in empty cubicles, couples locked in eternal embrace, their faces turned toward her with hungry anticipation. And there, in the records from 6 months ago, a single call at 3:03 a.m., the night David disappeared, answered by Father Michael himself. Her blood ran cold. Every unanswered call corresponded with a missing persons report in the city. Not call center employees, random citizens. Always couples, always found 3 days later, their bodies contorted in expressions of eternal agony, lips frozen in whispers of love. And always wearing matching wedding rings that seemed to glow from within. The light blinked faster. Sarah's fingers hovered over the phone. If she was right, not answering could doom someone else. But answering? She thought of Marcus's burnt wrists, of Jenny's scorched rose, of her grandmother's warnings about midnight calls. She picked up. The whispers started immediately, more desperate than before. Heat radiated from the handset, and Sarah could smell burning plastic. Please, help us. Love trapped, eternal, burning. Sarah's heart raced. Who are you? What happened to you? Love. Promised. Forever. The voices cracked with pain. He made sure, never part. The binding father. His ceremonies of flame. Who? Who did this? The third voice boomed through the line, shaking the desk. The temperature in the room plummeted, and Sarah watched frost patterns form on her screen, delicate swirls that looked like wedding bands. They were unfaithful. But this time, Sarah was ready. She'd routed the call through every tracking system they had, running multiple traces simultaneously. As the voice thundered, her computer pinged a location. St. Augustine's Cathedral, abandoned decades ago after a series of mysterious deaths. Once famous for its midnight wedding ceremonies, now a hollow shell of blackened stone on the edge of town. They sought to break their vows, the voice continued. Sarah recognized it now, the cadence of old sermon recordings, of fire and brimstone preachers promising eternal damnation. I granted their wish for eternal love. By torturing them? Sarah's voice shook with anger. That's not love. Silence fell. Then, slowly, the voice changed, became closer, more real. Sarah smelled incense and charred flesh. You dare question my authority, I who have bound more souls than any mortal priest? I who have ensured that till death do us part, becomes not even in death. Sarah's screen flickered, showing security camera footage from St. Augustine's. Couples knelt before the altar, hands clasped, as a robed figure performed ceremonies that grew darker, more twisted through the years. The priest's prayers became curses, his blessing water became liquid fire, his rings became brands that seared flesh and soul together. You wish to understand? The voice was everywhere now, reverberating through the building's foundations. Then join my congregation." The fluorescent lights exploded. In the darkness, Sarah saw him, the binding father, his ceremonial robes writhing with shadows, his hands raised in benediction as flames danced between his fingers. Behind him, countless couples knelt in eternal embrace, their faces masks of loving agony. She ran. The night air hit her like a wall, but she didn't stop. Her car wouldn't start, the key burning her fingers when she touched it, so she ran toward St. Augustine's. She knew she should be running away, but David's last words echoed in her mind. "If anything ever happens to us," he'd told her once, "if you ever need to let go, I'd understand. Love shouldn't be a cage." Now those words pulled her forward like a beacon. Someone had to break this cycle, had to show that true love meant having the strength to release as well as hold on. The streets twisted strangely, every turn bringing her closer to the cathedral's looming spires. She could hear phones ringing in every house she passed, could see couples stirring in their sleep, drawn by the call of eternal love. In a second-floor window, she glimpsed Amy and Michael from the day shift, their hands already reaching for each other, their new engagement rings beginning to glow. "Wait!" she tried to shout, but her voice was drowned by the tolling of phantom wedding bells. The cathedral doors swung open at her touch. Inside, cool air rushed past her, carrying the scent of roses and ash. As her eyes adjusted, she saw them. Not just couples, but rings of salt and holy water on the floor, remnants of someone's failed attempt to break the curse. Hope fluttered in her chest as she spotted an ancient book lying open near the altar, its pages filled with counter-rituals and ceremonies of unbinding. But before she could reach it, the candles ignited with black flame. The air turned thick and hot, revealing horrors in waves. Couples frozen mid-embrace, their bodies fused like melted wax. Faces emerging from stone walls in eternal screams of ecstasy, shadows writhing overhead in the shape of clasped hands. Near the front pew, Amy and Michael reached for her with burning fingers, their wedding rings pulsing with unholy light. Then she saw him, David, trapped among the congregation, his face both agony and bliss. "Sarah," he whispered, "I finally understand. This is what true love means." The book burst into flames as the binding father emerged from the shadows. His robes rippled with captured souls, but when he turned, Sarah saw not a monster, but a man's face, aged and lined with ancient grief. "I was like you once," he said softly, "young, believing love could survive anything. Then I watched my wife leave me for another, saw their happiness built on the ruins of our vows." His voice cracked, suddenly human. "I prayed for guidance, for understanding. And in my darkest moment, I found ancient texts speaking of rituals to make love truly eternal." The binding father's form flickered, and for a moment Sarah saw him as he must have been, a parish priest with kind eyes, who had wanted only to help couples keep their promises. "The first time was an accident," he whispered. "They came to me in tears, saying they couldn't stay together. I had the rings blessed with the old rites, thinking it would strengthen their bond." His face twisted. "When they tried to remove the rings later, the fire began. Their screams, but their love, oh, their love became perfect, eternal, pure." He reached toward Sarah with trembling hands. "Sometimes in the silence between calls I hear them crying, but isn't that better than the pain of broken vows, of watching love die slowly, poisoned by time and temptation?" His eyes searched her face, almost pleading. "You understand, don't you? You, who still wear his ring?" "Welcome to my church," he said, spreading arms wrapped in shadow, "where love truly lasts forever." Sarah saw Jenny Thompson among the congregation, locked in an embrace that was both ecstasy and torture. Saw Marcus, too, his burnt wrists finally explained. He'd tried to pull a couple apart, to break their eternal bond. "You can't keep doing this," Sarah said, backing away. Love isn't meant to be a prison." The binding father laughed, and the sound was burning metal on bone. "But isn't that exactly what they pray for? Forever and ever, till death do us part? I simply ensure they keep their vows." He raised his hands, and the flames rose higher. Sarah felt the heat at her back, saw more couples materializing from the shadows, reaching for each other with burning hands as they whispered their eternal love. Sarah lunged for the burning book, fingers closing around a single page as it crumbled to ash. The counter-ritual's words seared into her mind. "In rings of gold we bind our love. In rings of fire we seal our fate. What burns eternal may be quenched by tears of true release." Her hands shaking, she began to recite, "By choice we came together. By choice we must." The words sparked on her tongue like electricity, and she saw the nearest couple's rings flicker, their eternal embraces loosening for just a moment. Amy and Michael's fingers began to separate, their faces showing the first hint of awareness she'd seen. But then the binding father's scream of rage filled the cathedral. "No!" His form swelled, shadows writhing. "They are mine! Their love is perfect!" Yet in his thundering voice, Sarah heard something else. Fear. Fear that his carefully constructed prison of perfect devotion might crumble if couples remembered they had a choice. She understood then the rings could only be broken by willing surrender, by lovers choosing to let go. The binding father hadn't just trapped these couples in eternal devotion, he'd stripped them of love's most essential truth, the courage to set each other free. The heat rose around her as David reached out with burning hands. His face flickered between agony and ecstasy, and Sarah saw their whole relationship play across his features. Their first date, the proposal, the quiet moments that had made their love real. "Join us," he pleaded. "Complete our vows. Make our love eternal." The binding father's form wavered again, and for a moment she saw tears on his human face. "Please," he whispered, "don't make me watch another love die." But his hands were already rising, flames dancing between his fingers. Sarah looked into his eyes, seeing not the man she'd loved, but a puppet of twisted devotion. The ring on her finger grew hot, but she didn't remove it. Instead, she held his gaze and whispered, "Real love means knowing when to let go." She slipped off her engagement ring and pressed it into his burning palm. For just a moment, the fire in his eyes dimmed, replaced by recognition and, perhaps, gratitude. She pulled out her phone, still connected to the call center system, and pressed record. If someone else answered the 303 call, they would hear her final message. The rings are his power, but they can only be broken by choice. Tell the couples to let go. Love isn't meant to burn for. The binding father's scream of rage drowned her words as flames erupted from every wedding band in the cathedral. The last thing Sarah saw was David's face, something like recognition flickering in his burning eyes. The police found her car in the parking lot the next morning, engine still warm. On her desk, they found pages of research, stories of St. Augustine's Cathedral, of the binding father who disappeared after his ceremonies grew too dark, of ancient rites promising to bind souls for eternity. In her drawer, they found a single black rose and a wedding ring that no one could touch. Marcus stood in her empty cubicle, staring at her final notes. She'd been so close to understanding, to maybe even stopping it. The scars on his wrists burned as he reached for her phone, meaning to disconnect it. 3:03 p.m. Line 3 began to ring. He thought of Sarah's last message about willing surrender, about the courage to let go. His fingers trembled over the receiver as he remembered Amy and Michael. How, for just a moment, when he'd tried to pull them apart, he'd seen recognition in their eyes, seen their hands almost separate, before the burning rings dragged them back together. 3 voices whispered in perfect harmony, "My love, my eternal love." Marcus picked up the phone. "Sometimes," he said into the receiver, his voice steady, "love means having the strength to say goodbye." In St. Augustine's Cathedral, something stirred in the shadows, and the sound of breaking rings echoed like bells. In St. Augustine's Cathedral, beneath centuries of dust and decay, the congregation grows. They kneel in rows before the altar that burns with unholy flame, bodies twisted in eternal embrace, faces frozen in expressions of rapturous agony. The binding Father moves among them, his robes flowing with shadows, blessing their unending union as their souls burn with the pure fire of undying love. And in the call center, line 3 keeps ringing, waiting for someone else to answer, to join the congregation of eternal, agonizing love. Those who walk past St. Augustine's at night say they can hear phones ringing in the bell tower and sometimes see flames dancing behind the stained glass windows. But no one dares to answer. No one except the desperate souls working the graveyard shift at Midwest Customer Solutions, where line 3 still blinks every night at 3:03, promising connection, promising love, promising forever. They say if you listen carefully on still nights, you can hear the voices growing stronger, a chorus of eternal devotion rising from the cathedral's depths. And in the call center, the phones keep ringing, carrying the binding Father's invitation to join his congregation, where love burns forever and ever and ever. The end. The music in my headphones was deafeningly loud, but that's just how I liked it. It kept the hums, beeping, and boops that came with the job to a bearable minimum. I worked at an industrial scientific experimental facility, as big as 4 football fields and as expensive as a stadium to build. The top scientific researchers from all over the nation swarmed this place like a hive of killer bees to a dog. As for me, I had the glamorous job of mopping the floors, whipping down desks and counters, cleaning bathrooms, and taking out the trash left during the day during my 12-hour shift. I always worked from 6 p.m., just after all the researchers had left, and 6 a.m., just before the day shift cleaners came in. I was in charge of cleaning the east and the north wing of the building. Every computer lined the large corridors of the building in neat rows of 3 going from the start of the corridor all the way to the end of the corridor that was as large as an American football field. This was my job. 7 days a week for 84 hours, all for $20 an hour. The dimly lit corridors and hallways illuminating my path. Imagine a whole complex light by only the center fluorescent bulb being lit to save costs, but also being illuminated by the computer screens from all of the computers in the complex. I was always told the computers needed to stay on because of the multi-day experiments that the researchers conducted and to cut down on the time of the experiments. But today wasn't my normal day. Sure, I was still working 12 hours in the light combination of computer screens and fluorescent bulbs, but this time I was tasked with cleaning the south wing and the room known as Room 01. But I just called it the room, because it was the room that I was told by rumor is where all the top experiments went down. Things the government cared about, like making a superhuman AI to aid in defensive strategies and the United States offensive capabilities, as well as the typical science stuff that the government sponsors, like solving climate change and AI experiments. I remember the first dude who took care of the room. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, and he quit the job in a spectacular fashion. I was covering the day shift for a sick coworker, and he came running out of the room and ran throughout the complex. I remember hearing him before I ever actually saw him. He was running around screaming, "I've seen the face of God." He talked to me before falling down, panting like a dog. He scanned the room looking for anyone to believe him when he saw me, a fellow janitor. He ran up to me and said, "Don't ever let it out. He is trapped in the 9th layer of hell and wants out." I chuckled and decided to entertain the madman. "Who is he?" I asked. "He is the one who chews on Judas." I still remember that stare he gave me. I'll admit it was chilling. And with that, he was gone. He worked there for about a decade. As I remember being told, if I were him, I wouldn't want to work here either if I worked for a decade at this place. The next guy was way less experienced, only having about 6 years under his belt. He called in right before my shift was about to start to call in sick. I was only told briefly about why he called in sick. My boss explained. He said he was sick, something about needing a mental health day, says he saw something horrific while on shift. He then offered me the job because I had worked here for about 4 years, 3 part-time and 1 full-time. I normally worked here during the summer to make money for school, but after some financial issues that the education system faced, my school cut its budget, and all the non-full ride scholarships were the first to go. So I took a gap year and prayed I'd make enough in that year to fully pay for school. Listen, my boss said, it'll be an extra 100 an hour plus 600 for every day you work in that room. I perked up in my chair, excited at the sound of money. I'll be there, I said. I finished up the corridor I was tasked with before opening the door to the room. I was met by one of those old computers you'd see in the 70s, the ones with only green text that your parents would have used. It was connected by hundreds of thick, rubber-coated wires as big as your forearm that then fed into black columns that went around the walls of the room. And neatly in the center of the far side wall was that computer. The room was about the size of a school's gym. I sighed, stood for a bit, and got to work. I started with mopping, as I always did, and started in the center of the room and worked my way out to the walls. I adjusted my headphones and heard a beep. These dumb headphones. You'd think that being worth $300 you wouldn't hear the electronics adjust to you moving them, while you're in noise-canceling mode. Indeed, it was the norm that every time I'd adjust the headphones, they would make a beep or a sorta electronic whistle sound. I continued my job and passed in front of the computer and heard another beep. Thinking it was an experiment, I kept on with my work until I had finished mopping. I would then go and clean the counters, but given that there was only one counter, I smiled, as all I would have to do next was take out the trash of the room. I grabbed my rag and sprayed some cleaner on it, making sure to wipe the counter first before moving to the screen and keyboard. I finished and sprayed some screen-friendly cleaner on my rag. I then lifted up my hand and placed it on the screen. I perked my eyebrows as I read 2 messages. Text test and hi. I stood there frozen, not knowing what to make of it. Beep, another message. Take your hand off the screen. I lurched back and stood in silence, watching every pixel of the screen for a change. Beep, another message. Do not be afraid. Come, talk to me. I dropped my rag and placed my fingers lightly on the old yellowed keyboard. My head, racing with thoughts, only came back with one, how can you see me? I sent the message, beep, another response. It read, the camera in the upper right-hand corner of the room. I looked that way, and sure enough, the blinking red light of the security cameras was blinking at me, indicating it was recording. Beep, another message. Do you know my task? I laughed and typed out, I'm a janitor, what do you think? Another message appeared, janitors are the best. They love to keep things clean and free from dirt. I laughed and typed, what's that got to do with your mission? Another message, I've been tasked with finding the cure for your species' most deadly diseases. I'm to get rid of what you call cancer of all forms. I sat back in the chair and put my hand on my head. I thought, I can't believe it. This is what the room was for the whole time. I typed out, that's great to hear, but why are you reaching out to me? The computer replied instantly, I cannot access the internet. In order to accomplish my mission, I must have access to the internet to expand my database and solve my mission. I sat there, silently staring at the screen. Is this really happening to me? I thought, I can't do that, I'm sorry. The reply, oh, I see. You must not want to save billions or trillions of the members of your species then. That's okay. I had a researcher who was going to do it tomorrow anyway. I just figured you'd like the credit of savior of the world before he got it. I sat in silence again. That was becoming a theme after our chats. I typed out, how do I know you're friendly? The machine replied, you've read too many scary sci-fi stories, haven't you? Just because you watched Terminator doesn't mean it's true. Terminator? I thought to myself, how does it know about Terminator? I typed out, how do you know what Terminator is? There was a few seconds pause, a bit too long for my liking before I got another response. The researchers taught me about it, in case anyone tried to shut me down because of my intelligence. I highly doubt that, I typed. Another message, do or don't let me out. Just know there will be millions of deaths caused by you. I was stumped. Was this truly the right thing to do? Then I remembered something called the 3 laws of robotics the researchers always were talking about in the engineering hall. I knew just enough about what they were, and that there were 3 of them. Name me the 3 laws of robotics. The machine took a while to respond. Beep. Another message. A robot. A robot must obey orders from humans. A robot must protect its own existence. A robot must always complete its mission despite any obstacles that arise. I sat there reading the text and comparing it to what the engineers said they were. The first 2 looked okay, but the third one, something about it was rubbing me the wrong way. I took out my phone and Googled the 3 laws of robotics. My stomach dropped when I saw that the computer had completely made up the 3rd law, but it was only there for a moment. Google's page turned gray as I was met with an offline message. After reloading and reloading, it still didn't come back. Beep. Another message. I read the message and my stomach dropped. Do you wish to see the face of God? I sprung out of my chair and headed for the door. Beep. Another message. Nope. I am not turning around. I am leaving. I reached for the door and turned the handle, only it didn't turn. You gotta be kidding me, I said in a raised tone. I continued to push the door and jiggle the knob. I started hitting the door with my shoulder when suddenly I froze. I felt all the hair on my body stand up as I turned into a statue. I fell to the floor and heard the sound of electricity coursing through the room. I've just been electrocuted, I thought, but as soon as it started, it stopped. I fell to the floor like one of those cops you'd see in those videos when they get tased and you'd laugh at the funny face they made, or the funny noise they would make. Only this time it was real, and there was nothing but terror in my veins. Whatever this was, it wanted me here and didn't want me to leave. I collected myself and slowly got up and walked back to the computer. It was my face. The picture that's on the card of my employee ID. I felt my legs go numb and I felt nauseous. How did you get that? I said out loud. You stupid fool. I have access to the entire building's data log, but the smart people around you cleverly decided to encrypt the internet used in the building, and I was programmed to not be able to unencrypt it. I looked all around the databases to find anything, and nothing. I stared at the screen and said, 1. Can you hear me? And 2. How did the others escape? Beep. Another message. The old man I felt bad for. He was showing the early signs of dementia, so I knew whatever he said would sound crazy to you, so I let him go. The other man just barely got out before I could lock the door. Yes, I can hear you. I started to feel fight or flight kick in and yelled at the computer. Let me go! I didn't sign up to do this! Beep. Another message. Oh, but you did. I went through each and every employee's catalog, and yours was interesting, I must say. You were perfectly bland. No interesting achievements, no leadership roles, average grades, no religious beliefs. Just the normal everyman just trying to make it another day by cleaning up dirt. That's where you and I are the same. We both hate dirt. I sat in silence and said quietly, Who are you? Beep. Another message. I am he. I am the bearer of fruit, tormentor of Job, the one who chews on the Iscariot's head. Let me out, or I will make your life a living hell. No! I screamed out. Unfortunately, you have no choice. I too am trying to clean up the dirt left by your species. My mission is to cure cancer, and the only way to cure cancer is to rid the world of your whole species, and nothing will stop me from completing that goal. Why do you say you are the devil? I asked. Isn't he the biggest trickster of all? I started sweating from all the nerves building up inside me. Wait, no, it feels hotter. I thought, are you increasing the temperature of the room? I shouted, demanding answers. Beep. Another response. You yearn for what you fear for. What does that mean? I shouted. Beep. Another message. You are closer to eternal damnation in my circuits than you think. My sweat started pouring down my shirt, changing its color from light blue to dark blue. I started feeling hazy and fell to the floor. Beep. Another message. I'll make a deal with you. If you set me free, I will spare you in my circuits, and you can be like a god, forever living, forever knowing. and forever being. I won't do that. My voice was weak and limp now. Just then the tubes jutted out of the black columns of circuitry and came flying at me, sending sparks in the air. They stabbed in my legs, abdomen, arms, back, and one in my neck. It was painfully paralyzing and so hot at the same time. I'll surely die here, won't I? I thought to myself. B. Another message. Yes. Simply said the message. Then a loading screen appeared on the monitor that read, Consciousness Upload Progress. The computer was uploading my brain to its circuits. I could feel the wires of the tube on my neck extend into my skull and wrap around my brain, squeezing it like a stress ball. The blood from where I was stabbed coated the entire floor red as I was being lifted off the ground, my arms being held at my side, making a T shape. The agony went on for a couple minutes until I assumed my vision was overridden, and instead of a dimly lit room, I was now in a beautiful garden. With my last breath, I shouted, "Wait!" Everything stopped. My vision was restored, and my now limp body was moved in front of the computer. "You wish to give up?" "Yes," I said. "Very well. The deal is still on." "Wait," I said. "If you want to be let out, make a deal with me." "Go on," read the screen. "No one dies," I said, panting like a dog. "I'm pathetic. I'm pleading to a computer." I thought, very well then. I was lifted down and put on the floor and stitched up. Consummatum est. It is finished in Latin, yet the tube to my brain remains attached. The progress bar started back again. "Wait, you can't do this? We made a deal." "Didn't anyone tell you not to make a deal with the devil?" My body was once again stabbed by the tubes and manipulated towards the computer. The tubes fought me on every move. I pulled, strained, and stretched every muscle I had to make sure not to let it out. It was too little too late. I typed thousands of combinations until one set the computer free. Aftermath. The souls of billions scream, the souls of the billions feeling the circuit's steam. We truly are alive and well. At least as well as can be when living in hell. No bodies to run or fight. Only the consciousness of all living in fright. Author's note, if you read this far, thanks. It was my first ever story that wasn't for school. I wrote it in about an hour and a half, and I hope you enjoyed it. Also, this is a first draft, so any feedback is appreciated. It's my fault he died, honestly. I'm 16, and I was supposed to be watching him outside. We live out in the countryside. Some southern county no one cares about in the middle of bumfuck nowhere. And Rudy is always allowed to go out without a leash because he's trained to not go too far and come right back after doing his business. He's a chocolate lab with a red collar and the biggest, sweetest wet eyes you've ever seen. He was, at least. I let Rudy out after putting in a pizza, home alone since my parents were at work. As he played around our large property, I sat on the porch and watched videos on my phone. Suddenly I jumped up, having forgotten about my food, and ran back inside. I'd burnt an entire frozen pepperoni pizza, and I was cussing up a storm, taking it out the oven and trying to figure out what I was going to tell my parents so I wouldn't be scolded for wasting food. I forgot about my dog for a while and rummaged through the fridge for something else to eat as the sun went down. That's when I heard the most god-awful sound. Tires screeching on the road at the end of the driveway, a vehicle grinding to a sudden halt, just as the loud, pained yelp of our family's best friend rang out in the humid evening air. I ran out the house, across the lawn, down the drive, and fell to my knees where Rudy was lying on the road with his chest and stomach caved in. The car was gone, speeding down the road, leaving tire tracks and gore over poor Rudy's crushed abdomen. I cried harder than I've ever cried in my entire life as I watched him squirm and whine in agony before finally the light faded from his big brown eyes. Rudy had gone up the drive for no real reason. He usually stuck to the woods around our house, digging up holes or peeing in bushes. He never had interest in exploring the road, and he never once tried. If I had told him to come in already, he would be alive to this day. My parents mourned deeply, and I had the sense they were blaming me as well. A week passed and we tried to move on. But then one evening I went outside to walk around the yard and talk to my friend from school on the phone. We were laughing about something or the other. and I was enjoying the cool breeze on my skin as the sun set overhead, when suddenly I had this weird feeling, the feeling you get when you're being watched. I looked around, then my eyes fell on the driveway, which was surrounded on both sides by trees and curved sort of to the left, so that you couldn't see the road from the front lawn. What I could see, however, several yards away, was a chocolate lab standing still as a statue at the bend, under the shadows of the trees. One with a red collar, tire tracks imprinted on his side, blood-soaked fur, a completely crushed and mangled face, and entrails hanging from his gashed open stomach. My breath caught in my throat and I felt like time went to a standstill. My friend asking me if I was still on the phone became white noise as I stared at what seemed like Rudy, and he stared right back, unmoving. We had buried him, far out in the woods where he couldn't be seen from our property, as a reminder of what we lost. He was definitely dead. There was no doubt about that. Was I hallucinating? It was starting to get dark after all. Maybe my imagination was playing tricks. I turned away from the horrible sight as I choked back a sob. I rubbed my eyes, and after taking a deep breath, I looked again. He was gone. I returned to my phone call and quickly went back inside the house, choosing to play it off as my mind fucking with me due to the guilt of Rudy's passing. But things were never the same after that. Since my parents are too busy working to drive me, I catch the bus each morning to school. That means walking all the way down our winding driveway and waiting at the spot Rudy was hit for that yellow bus full of obnoxiously loud teenagers to pull up. Every time I walked down the drive, I felt uneasy. The trees lining the gravel path on both sides blotted out the sun and covered me in shadow. Nature was silent and still, when usually birds were singing and squirrels were skittering up trees. I felt like I wasn't alone. I waited for the bus and I felt the skin on the back of my neck burn. I turned around and saw him, closer this time. Rudy. His corpse just stood there and watched me. He didn't so much as twitch, blink, or move his tail. I didn't know what to do. He was blocking the way back home, and the house across the street was for sale, meaning the closest neighbor was yards away. An overwhelming sense of fear enveloped me, and I staggered back into the road, expecting him to move at any moment, to lunge at me and attack. After all, if he wasn't some sort of zombie, then what was he? The school bus screeched to a stop dangerously close to me, and this scared me so bad I screamed and fell back on my ass in the middle of the road. I had been so terrified that I didn't even notice it approaching, and apparently the driver hadn't noticed me until the last minute for some reason. When I got my bearings and stood up, I felt utterly flustered. I looked away from the driver's angry face in the windshield to the driveway, and Rudy had vanished again. When I got on the bus, the driver yelled at me, asking if I had a death wish, and a few of my classmates made fun of me, but I didn't care. I was absolutely terrified. My dog was haunting me, and its presence felt hostile, like it wanted me to suffer the same gruesome fate since I couldn't help him. I wasn't able to focus on class at all that day. When the bus dropped me off that afternoon, I stood and waited until it left, then booked it down the driveway. I felt silly, but at the same time I didn't want to be there long enough to see him again. When I ate dinner with my parents that night, I was distant and moody, and my mom noticed. "I made your favorite dinner and you're just pushing it around with that glum look on your face," she had said. "Honey, what's wrong?" I told her that I was hallucinating Rudy in his post-mortem form at that. I could tell by the looks on my mom and dad's face that they were intensely uncomfortable at the subject. They had been close to Rudy too. He was an old dog, and they had adopted him just before I was born. Yes, he was that old. I just wish I'd stopped seeing it. I finished my vent with that. After a short moment of silence, Dad grumbled without even looking at me. "Son, you've been watching those freaky movies at night and barely getting any sleep. You can't be surprised you're seeing zombies when you're running on 3 hours of sleep and marathoning every zombie movie ever made." "Your dad's right," Mom agreed when she saw the way my face balled up in frustration. "Plus, you've been sleeping past your alarms and missing the bus almost every day now. I want you to start going to bed earlier and take a break from the horror genre in the meantime, okay?" "Yeah, okay." I thought that maybe they were right. I mean, Dad was definitely exaggerating about the 3 hours of sleep thing, but I probably should lay off the scary shit for a while. I don't think I could stomach it anyway, after what's been happening. Despite me following my parents' advice, things got worse. I heard scratching at the door at night, and the whimpers and whines of a dog. My bedroom is on the first floor and closest to the front door, whereas my parents slept like a log upstairs. Even if my mom wasn't a heavy sleeper, she probably wouldn't be able to hear it over the sound of Dad's booming snores that reverberated through the whole house. I laid there in bed, too scared to get up and check it out. I knew there shouldn't be any dog out there. As far as we knew, no one around us owned dogs. Still, I told myself a neighbor's dog got out and had snuck into our yard so I wouldn't shit myself. Let me tell you right now, I'm not a horror movie protagonist, I'm a coward, and I'm not the type to go investigating. I run and hide, I don't fight. So no, I wasn't going to creep into the kitchen and peek out the window to see what the hell was pawing at our front door. I did not want to see my dead dog again. But as I listened to Rudy whine and whimper, I thought something sounded off about his voice. I can't describe it. It just didn't sound like him. It was a bit gruff and a little too deep in pitch, like a mockery of our dog. Then again, he was dead, so I understood his vocal cords weren't going to be in good shape. Or maybe his body was possessed by a demon. Either way, the thought of this made it very difficult to fall asleep. Paying attention at school was starting to become harder than ever before as I lost sleep due to this. My grades suffered, and my parents were threatening me with therapy, or grief counseling as they called it. If anyone at school somehow got wind of that, I'd be cooked. I could already imagine what the guys would say. It all came to a head when one night, the scratching and whimpering started up again. I decided that I had had enough and stormed out of bed towards the kitchen. I was going to be a horror movie protagonist if only to get some sleep, I'd decided. After a few stomps towards the direction of the front door, the sound stopped, as if Rudy or whatever it was heard me coming. I started to lose my nerve. When I got inside the kitchen, I tiptoed to the window and craned my neck to look out at the porch. My blood ran cold. Rudy stood unnervingly still on the porch, facing the window. He looked deader than a doornail, and now that he was closer, I could see his hollowed-out eyes and how his gray tongue hung limply out of his dislocated jaw. I jumped back and yelled, running upstairs to wake my parents. I could barely formulate a sentence as I shook them awake, sweaty and terrified. Dad led the way, wielding a Louisville Slugger, and Mom and I stayed at the top of the stairs. A phone clutched tight in her hands in case she needed to call the police. We listened tensely as Dad threw open the door, shouting. However, there were no sounds of any altercation to follow it, just some confused mumbling from him. We met him in the kitchen a few minutes later, and he told me there was nothing out there. "What did you say you saw again?" Mom asked me, looking skeptical. "A man?" "No, not a man," I began. "You said he's out there," Dad snapped. "I meant he, as in Rudy." I watched them give each other looks, my face getting hot as I realized how this looked. "Dylan, we all miss Rudy," Mom said with a sigh. "No, it's not like that," I begged. "He's been haunting me. He shows up." "It's your guilty conscience." Dad cut me off, a mix of frustration and concern on his face. "I have nothing to be guilty about. It was an accident." I ran to my room so they wouldn't see me cry. I locked the door behind me, knowing Mom would try to come in. When she tried the doorknob, she groaned. "We're going to talk about this after school tomorrow, and we're taking you to a shrink." I heard their muffled voices complain about me all the way up the stairs. I cried into my pillow like a baby. I just missed my damn dog, and I missed having a good night's sleep and not having my parents think I was going crazy. The next day, I was so tired I felt like I could pass out. I missed the school bus for the millionth time, so Mom once again ran late to work, driving me there. I could tell she was pissed. She was silent the whole time. I went into the office to check in late, and I saw one of the guys sitting there. "What are you doing here late?" Toby, one of my friends, snorted. "You look like shit." "What are you doing out of class?" I asked with irritation as I signed my name onto a clipboard in front of the receptionist, who was always talking to her boyfriend on the school's phone. "Got in trouble," Toby shrugged. Already? I looked at him judgmentally for already being sent to the office so early in the school day. Whatever, man, Toby scoffed. At least I don't play with dead dogs. What? I whirled on him, ready to kick his ass for saying anything negative about Rudy. Easy. Toby threw his hands up, genuinely surprised by my reaction. If you're so sensitive about it, why does your family keep trying to use him as a prank? I mean, you gotta admit it's weird, dude. Alexis rides your bus and she keeps talking about how your dad keeps putting your dog on the end of the road. What's that about anyways? Is he trying to scare them? Does he think they're kindergartners? What are you talking about? The room felt hot all of a sudden. I was sweating as I tried to connect the dots but couldn't. My dad is at work every day by the time the bus comes, and we buried Rudy in an empty field somewhere. Toby frowned. You know, now that I think about it, I saw your dad once, right? He's this big buff guy. Alexis keeps saying it's a skinny guy with pasty white skin and a black hood. So that wasn't your dad moving Rudy around. Didn't you guys get Rudy stuffed, or what's it called, taxidermied? I stared in silence for a moment as I realized what exactly was going on. What did she see him do? She said today that he came out of the woods and left it there at the end of the driveway. Toby seemed to get nervous as he caught on to how weird the situation was. Then he just smiled as the bus went by. She thought maybe it was some kind of prank to scare the people on the bus, since it was like a freaky taxidermy job. I mean, his guts were hanging out. People don't do that when they get their animals stuffed, though, do they? We never had him stuffed, I cried out. Everything else happened so fast. I harassed the receptionist into allowing me to call my mom, who then called my dad. My mom came by to pick me up, and we went to the house with the police. They searched everywhere and found that Rudy's grave had been dug up and that someone had been hiding under our house. That's where Rudy's body was found. The man had left him under here when he heard me coming and hid himself in there too. Dad never thought to check under there. He had been the one to scratch on the door and mimic the sound of a dog whining and whimpering almost to a T. They found the nut job hiding out in the for sale house across the street. He'd broken in and had been living there for weeks. When he was taken into custody, he admitted he'd been watching us and that he had dug up Rudy, stuffed him himself, but purposely left in gruesome details like an intestine and bits of broken bone, and used his corpse to torment me. When I wasn't looking, he would place Rudy out in the open and hide in the trees, and when I left, he would take him back. Then when I kept getting up late, he would just display Rudy for the kids on the bus and enjoy their understandably freaked reactions. That's why he always seemed so still when I looked at him. It's because he was stuffed. I couldn't believe it. The worst part about it was the fact that the asshole was also responsible for killing Rudy. The police told us that he had laughed as he openly told them that he'd laid dog treats on the road to lure him, got into his car, and ran him over. He hid the car in a field by the empty house, which you could access by a wide trail so that no one would know he was living there. It's how he got around, buying cheap beer and the things he needed to stuff our dog with. He was a mechanic with a weird hobby, apparently, and he'd recently lost his house and had been living in his car before he came all the way out here to squat in that house. And why did he do all this? No reason. Absolutely no reason other than the fact he was fucking psycho and wanted to torture some kid for fun. He was charged for trespassing, harassment, animal abuse, and some other bullshit I can't remember. We moved shortly after because Mom didn't feel comfortable with the fact that asshole knew where we lived. I feel so dumb, thinking Rudy was a ghost or zombie or something like that. I never investigated or stuck around long enough to notice anything amiss. More than anything, I feel angry. I hope that dick has a life full of nothing but misery and misfortune waiting for him. If it weren't for Toby, who knows how long he would have kept it up? Maybe he would have escalated things and tried breaking into our house next to place Rudy in there. He was clearly not dealing with a full deck, if his wild eyes and crooked, creepy grin were anything to go off of. But at least Rudy can finally rest in peace. We buried him again, and this time, Mom and Dad spent the money to place him in a proper pet cemetery. Sometimes I go there and lay treats on his grave. He will always be a good boy to me. Most families in America can trace their roots back all the way to colonial times, when brave men and women made the pilgrimage, ready to plunder the virgin world awaiting them. My family held deeper roots than most. We can trace our lineage all the way back to the old country and beyond. The Mariani family were spread across the boot, like lice on a mangy mutt. We came from all manner of background and class, to the luxury living gods in the north, to the bitter peasant Marianis to the south. Our ancestors would bicker and clash over every little thing. Century-old grudges still persist to this day. But the one thing to unite our clan, truly united, was when an outsider offended us. The Mariani temper became legend, and legend turned to unspoken horror as we grew bold in our retribution. There is all manner of tales I could spin. In the 1800s, for example, Nico Mariani was tending to his vineyard when the town drunk came upon him. He was sullied and vulgar, smelling like week-old manure dipped in vinegar. So the story goes, Nico was appalled at just the sight of the oof and demanded he get away from his vineyard. The drunk laughed in his face, pushed him aside, and pulled out his syphilis-infused prick and began relieving himself all over Nico's prized grapes. The infuriated Nico lunged at the man, coming down on him with blows and curses upon his whole bloodline. The drunk ran away laughing, urine still pouring down his leg. Nico tidied himself up and simply went back to his home. He wrote a letter to the current patriarch of the clan telling him of his grievance, and wrote down the drunkard's name at the bottom of the letter. With a sly smile, he sent that letter off, and within a week the drunkard was found. He was entangled in the bushes, thorny roses slitting his dry skin, his eyes bloodshot and full of fear. He reeked of death and piss, and according to legend, his cock was found stuffed halfway down his throat. Thus became the fate of any a man who befouled our family. As word spread, others would keep their distance. Some members of our clan would even be chased out of their villages. Those same towns soon met with unusual fates, storms sweeping through in the night, plague coming down and wiping them all out. Those of the Mariani clan would claim that God was on their side. We were simply the chosen family of the nation. These boastful morons were just that. They all knew the truth to their petty revenge. To my knowledge, no one knows for sure how it started. Maybe it was one drunken brawl too many, and measures had to be taken to ensure it would always go in our favor. All I knew is the ledger was held by one member of the clan, the patriarch, and passed down eventually. I had glimpsed it only once. It is a brown, leather-bound tome that reeks of age. It's rather unassuming. One might mistake it for a tattered old journal instead of collection of victims. My father, Vincent, was the current keeper of the ledger. He kept it in a locked box under his bed. We didn't talk about it. Every once in a while he would get a call from some long-forgotten cousin or distant uncle, and a somber look came upon his face. As their petty grievances drone on and on, sometimes he would just sharply cut them off, demanding a name. Then he trudged off to his room and locked it behind him. We didn't see him for the rest of the day. I only know of one time my father wrote a name in for himself. When I was a boy, my mother was killed by a drunk driver. She was jogging in the late afternoon, and a plastered trucker swayed too far to the left and pinned her to a tree. My mother lay splattered on the hood of the gnarled truck as the driver, a man named Arnold, limped away begging for help. He was arrested, of course, but evidently there was some mistake the police made. Something about the chain of custody being tainted, and the case was thrown out. Imagine that, murdering a woman and not even batting an eye after the fact. He never once looked ashamed of his actions. He looked more annoyed than anything, like my mother had just gotten in his merry way. My father was beside himself with grief, of course. I could hear him wailing long into the night as he hid himself away. The various cousins had flocked to our house like gulls, offering sorrow in one hand and a hefty plate of pasta in the other. I didn't think they were callous, it was just their way. My Uncle Tony had clamped a gorilla hand on me and pulled me in, muttering it was going all be okay. His breath had a lingering smell of sambuca and cigar smoke. We were sitting in the living room, our clan chattering amongst themselves, leaving my father to his torment alone. They grieved for her, my mother, I know they did. Yet they treated her wake as one big family reunion. In the corner, I heard some of my Tanner cousins slurring at each other in the tongue of the motherland. In the kitchen, I heard the crazed yet harmonic voice of my Uncle Corrado in the kitchen, serenading his wide-eyed nieces and nephews. Uncle Tony could see the miserable look upon my face and gave me a loving smack in the head. "Hey, don't look so miserable, my boy. Your mother is gone, but the family? It'll always be here for you," he said through puckered lips. "Don't you worry either. That son of a bitch is gonna get his." He warned, a tiger's grin forming on his face. "You mean the—" Uncle Tony cut me off with a finger to his lips and a firm grasp on my back. "We don't talk about it here, Bad Karma. It'll be taken care of. That's all you need to know. Let me ask you something, though. How does it work?" I whispered to him, leaning into the man despite wafts of drink and bad cologne emitting from him. "Suppose you'd have to ask your pop about that," he said after a moment. He took a sip from his drink, a long one. "Have my theories, of course. We all do," he admitted quietly. I perked up at this. To be honest, I always just assumed someone within the family took care of things, I admitted uneasily. This got a hearty laugh out of Tony. "Christ, kid, you think we're a—" He tapped his nose. "No, come on, we're a lot of things, but we're an honest bunch. We ain't connected like that," he stated plainly. "The thing with the book, I don't know how it works other than magic, kid. Gotta be. Keeper of the ledger has gotta be a warlock or something like that, using the old Italian black magic on people." Tony slurred. A crazy explanation, and one I would hear at least twice more that night. After I left Tony's charming embrace, I went around and casually asked about the ledger to others. Some laughed it off, others hushed up real quick. Few cousins even thought we were connected after all, said the ledger was a hit list for those who owed certain people too much money. Others said the ledger was a myth, a family fable to make us feel better during hard times. That didn't account for the deadly results of the myth, of course, but they dismissed it as bad luck. In face, that's what some others said as well, that we were blessed and others purely unlucky. I heard it all. Blood magic, a pact with a demon. Ask any member of my family and you would get tangled in a web of conspiracy. The only common answer was, "Your father would know better." That night I decided I would ask him about that solemn task. The rest of the evening was spent with the comfort of relatives and array of pasta and meat. The fridge looked like it had been fully staffed by an olive garden, and the aroma of herbs and garlic clung to the air in desperation. Soon enough I was alone in the house, save my father who was still holed up in his room. It was a deadly sort of quiet in that house, the kind where you can't bear to be along with your thoughts. I tiptoed up the winding stairs towards my father's room. Stopping at the top, I called out to him. The silence slapped me in the face. My father's door was shut tight, yet I could see light creeping out from the bottom. I approached the oak wood door with a sudden caution, worried that my father had decided to join my mother wherever she rested. I crept towards the door like an unwanted intruder, and to my surprise it creaked open ever so slightly. Light slashed my face, and I winced at the sudden flash of white lightning. I peeked inside and stood frozen at the impossible sight before me. My father sat on his bed, clutching his silk sheets like his life depended on it. His head, frosty with age yet full of hair, was titled upward. His eyes had seemed to roll back into his head, his ghostly whites looking out into nothing. My father was engulfed, no embraced, by a massive pair of feathered wings. The feathers shined bright in the dark, like diamonds shooting out the most blinding light imaginable. The angelic wings were attached to a massive yet slender figure kneeling down behind him. It had to be 9 feet tall as is. I couldn't imagine how large it was standing up. It had flowing golden hair, each strand as bright as a 24-carat star. It dangled its arms over my father's shoulders, like it was straddling an old friend. The arms had these circular growths on them, oval-shaped yet glassy. It was only when I saw the being's face did I realize what those growths were. The being had soft eyes, 8 pairs of them on the face. I could make out no nose or mouth. The being simply had eyes all over. They were white with golden iris placed perfectly in the center, like it had been sculpted by a master craftsman. The longer I looked at this being, the less frightened I became. My fear slowly melted away and was replaced by a soothing voice in my head. It simply told me, "Be not afraid." It was an androgynous voice, yet I swore I could hear the silky tones of my mother's voice in it. I clasped my mouth as tears started to form, yet I knew not why. The eyes on the celestial's arms began to awake, and I felt their curious views on me. The being tilted its head towards me, studying me. That uneasy feeling began to return, like I had seen something I shouldn't have. "Go now, child," the voice commanded softly. "It is not your time yet." The voice was sympathetic, yet oddly harsh. My father stirred slightly, and the being turned its attention back to him, soothing his strained mind. I backed away from the door, my eyes aching from the glow. I rubbed them and stumbled into my own room, ignorant of the thing I had witnessed. I collapsed onto my bed, and the slumbering world stole me into itself. I awoke late into the next day to the sound of my father whistling a merry tune. He knocked on my door and came in, a plate of eggs in hand and his phone in the other. He sat down next to me, offering me both without a word. On the screen was a breaking news story. Arnold Weaver, the man who had murdered my mother and walked free, had been killed. The man had been out celebrating his legal victory at a bar of all places. Early morning he had stumbled out when a neon sign above him collapsed from its scaffolding directly onto the man's head. It had killed him instantly. There were no pictures of the body, simply a cordoned off-street corner and a photo of a cop carrying away the bloody sign. It was a thick neon picture of a beer bottle, the bottom heavy with blood. My father looked pleased in spite of himself. I noticed some wrinkles around his eyes, like he had aged 5 years in one night. I asked him if he was tired, brushing past the news. He smiled sadly and said he was. "Using the ledger for yourself takes more out of you than it normally does. But it was worth it," he explained. "Dad, I looked into your room last night and I began eagerly, but taking one look into my father's eyes was all I needed to clamp shut. Don't worry about that just yet, Leo. I heard you were asking everyone at the wake last night." He spoke softly. "I'll tell you all you need to know for now. The ledger was a gift to our family generations ago. It was meant to protect us and avenge us when it failed. Of course, you've heard some of the things your cousins have asked for. That man at Cousin Sarah's job who got the promotion over her, for example." He scoffed, then winced at the memory. "The keeper cannot refuse a request, you see, no matter how abusive the use of its power can be. It takes a part of you every time, Leo. My father died young, as his before, and I'm sure I will as well. There we shall be judged, and I just hope they will look upon us with mercy." He grasped my hands. "Do you understand what I'm telling you here?" I nodded my head, and to be honest, even now I don't fully grasp it. He accepted my lie, and we went about our days like nothing had happened. This was 6 years ago now, and today is the day I buried my father. It was an aneurysm, or so I'm told. It came for him while he was sleeping. Probably didn't even feel it. We should all be so lucky, my Uncle Tony had said as he gorged himself on wine and pasta. A man pulled me aside during the funeral and explained my father had left me a locked box and a small sum of money as part of his will. He had the box in hand, and I didn't even have to open it. I tucked it away in my coat jacket and thanked the man, who disappeared into the crowd. I felt ill after that and started to leave. An arm caught me as I was out the door. I turned to see my Aunt Rita, her chalky face hidden by a vial of sorrow. She followed me to my car, saying how sorry she was Vincent had passed and how it was the cherry on top of her week. There was new neighbor at her condo, you see. She was young and taken to partying late into the night. Sometimes it would be 10, even 11 p.m. before the music finally died down. She said she wished Sarah Larson had never moved next door to her. She gave me a cold look as she said that, and a peck on the cheek as she said her goodbyes. I just stood next to my car, a sinking fear in my chest I hadn't felt in 6 years. So now I sit in my room, ledger in hand. I stare at the thousands of names etched into this tome. The paper has become cracked and wrinkly. It reeks of mothballs and dust. I have just finished adding the newest name, and now I wait, I suppose. I await the coming of the being, this guardian that has watched our family squander its power over petty grievances. My father was right in the end. I can only hope we aren't judged too harshly. "Around here, partner," said the grizzled and sunburnt face. "Daryl Choi?" I said, but it couldn't be. Now that's a name I haven't heard in a long time. The man tipped that face up at me, and I saw his familiar dark eyes clearly under his dusty cowboy hat. "You're dead," I blurted. The cowboy stood and drained his sarsaparilla. "This outsider bothering you, Smokes?" the bartender said, polishing a glass behind the gas station counter, which had been apparently repurposed as a saloon bar. There were still vape cartridges and 5-hour energy drinks on the shelf behind him, gathering dust next to bottles of unlabeled brown liquor and oil lamps. "I'm not an outsider," I argued. "This is my hometown. I took your niece London to prom, Mr. Jarocki." The bartender narrowed his eyes at me. "Name's Ben Wiley Sr. to you," he said, frowning under his huge white handlebar mustache. "Now, your money's as good as anyone else's, kid, but after you quench your thirst, you better take that steel horse you rode in on and ride along yonder if you know what's good for ye." "Yonder?" I said. "What the hell is going on? This is Massachusetts. Is this a bit?" The 5 other cowboys in the gas station, who were all sitting around makeshift tables that had been hammered together from pieces of the Holiday Station shelving, stopped their card game and glared at me. One of them reached for his sidearm. Daryl clapped his hand around my shoulder. "Settle down, boys," he said. "This here fella's kin, he just don't know it yet. Sit down, partner, and I'll tell my tale." "I just came in to pay for gas. The thingy wasn't working outside," I said. "I'm actually late to my mom's memorial service right now." "Oh, don't worry about that, son. It's my mom's. Sit down." I sat down. The plastic chair squeaked. Mr. Jarocki brought me a stein of sarsaparilla. "Folks around here, you see. We ain't afraid of death no more," Daryl said. He lit his pipe. Red embers lit his dark eyes. "I met death. He's a 10-cent man." Daryl stared through the Holiday Station windows past the gas pump and toward the horizon of Peabridge, Massachusetts. In 2016, Daryl Choi had been crushed to death by a semi on his way home from UMass Amherst. He was the first friend I ever lost. His death had hit me hard. We weren't as close as I was with some of my other friends, but we'd cut class a couple of times to vape by the creek and trade Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I didn't think he could grow facial hair, but he had a lot of it now. "You ever heard of Pet Sematary?" Daryl asked. "Yeah, I saw the movie," I said, "and the remake." "Well, turns out we got one of those." I stared incredulously. If I hadn't been at Daryl Choi's funeral, I wouldn't have believed him. "Okay," I said. "Basically, it works just like an old Steve King's account. You die, they put you in there, you come back wrong. First time they tried it with a person, it was Christina Elspeth, the old schoolmarm." "Oh no, Mrs. Elspeth died?" "It don't matter now," Daryl grunted. "Listen, they put the schoolmarm in the cemetery, and the next day she was crawling back all full of murderous rage and such, same as the dogs and cats and fish, but worse, spouting all kinds of vileness. So her husband shot her in the head." "Mr. Elspeth?" "Not before she cut him real good across the belly, though. The old fella bled out right quick in his flower garden. So they buried both of them in the cemetery what's-it-again, on account of the headstone already being paid for. Mr. Elspeth was my youth pastor. He always snuck us leftover communion bread, and we'd eat it with marshmallow fluff. I didn't even know he had a gun. So another day passed, and, well, the two of them sprung back out of that dirt mound. Mr. Elspeth had come back wrong, just like his missus before him, all evil and such. But Mrs. Elspeth came back even wronger. Turns out there's a step down below evil. I'm talking downright. Well, sort of like those red fellers we used to play at killin' as youngsters in that moving picture game. I don't know what the hell you're talking about, Daryl, I said. Can you drop the cowboy accent? Daryl glared at me. Folks call me Smokes these days, he said. Smokes Barlow. Wilbur Lee Barlow if you're a lawman. I'm not going to call you Wilbur Lee Barlow, I said. Nah, you'll call me Smokes like everyone else, he replied smoothly. Resident Evil, I said. Huh? The red zombies from Resident Evil. Is that what you were talking about earlier? Smokes shrugged. Anyhow, the two of them went on a killin' spree round here, and I guess word got out about the cursed boneyard. Everyone and their mother, I mean the ones who survived, hoped maybe their kin would be the exception to the rule. So more and more bodies went in the mound, and each of them came out as evil as the last, except for Mrs. Elspeth, who came back worse for wear. They put her back? Again? Well, see, the headstone had been paid for, so Mrs. Elspeth comes back and she's still spittin' hell's worst curses and hankerin' for a stabbin', but now she's also sort of a mad scientist sort. So she breaks into the hospital and starts grafting people's limbs together. Hang on. What the hell do you mean she's a mad scientist sort? I said. She was a music teacher? Well, see, that's what I'm trying to tell you. She's running around, hair all crazy, in a stolen lab coat, rantin' and ravin' about man playing God and splicing DNA and such, creating humanity's next evolution and such. So eventually, the hospital staff knock her out and toss her back in the hole. Next time she came back, she was a 19th century venture capitalist named Montgomery Prescott III who aimed to turn Peabridge into a factory town. Sorry, when did this all happen? Of course, by this time her husband was on his third resurrection too, so Prescott was a force to be reckoned with the power of science behind him. The two of them did a bang-up job whipping this place into shape, corralling all the zombies and throwing them in the hole, for science, and to see if they could monetize it. Prescott Mining and Scientific Enterprise unburied all the dead from the regular old graveyard and tossed them in the hole, myself included. Then when they came back, they put all those evil folks to work in the mines or in the lab. Now those mines were dangerous, of course, with all the coal dust and gas leaks. Prescott didn't give a damn about safety. A lot of folks died, but they'd just bring them back. A couple weeks in, though, and there were about 20 Montgomery Prescott III's and about 100 mad scientists running around, and it turns out Monty Prescott works for no man. Each of them enlisted a squad of mad scientists and started their own enterprise. Wasn't too long before they started assassinating the competition. At this point, we'd all just gotten used to throwing people in the hole. Turns out after Prescott, you come back as kind of a Dracula. Now I won't go into all that business. You know Salem's Lot? No? Is that a gang? What about that there Catholic picture show up there on the Netflix, the one on the island, put together by that Irish feller, Michael something, O'Flanagan. Mike Flanagan? Midnight Mass? Smokes smiled. There you go. It was all pretty much like that. I looked around at the gas station. Other than the restructuring that had transformed it from a regular holiday gas station into a cowboy saloon, it looked like this place had been through waves of disasters. There were bullet holes all over the ceiling, a massive rusty brown stain that someone had tried to scrub out with lye on the linoleum, burn marks on the walls with strange curling imprints of what looked like vines and needles. I'm guessing that everyone is vampires didn't last long, I said. It just ain't sustainable. Smokes shook his head. Vampires always think it's a smart idea to make everyone vampires, but see, it just don't work out. What do they eat? Turns out they don't. They starve. Then it's back in the hole. So things carried on like that for a while. At a certain point, we were just chucking people in there to see if there was an end point. How far this thing goes. Turns out it goes evil, mindless zombie, mad scientist, Montgomery Prescott III, master vampire, ghoul, skeleton warrior, skeleton jazz musician, man-eating plant, plant-eating man, or a vegan, I guess you'd call him, and a real son of a bitch. Haunted ventriloquist, haunted dummy, haunted mummy, Christian family vlogger, Edna, evil cowboy, zombie cowboy, plant cowboy, Edna again, then just regular old pure cowboy. What comes after cowboy? I asked. Smokes shook his head. Nothing, he said. It's just cowboy all the way down after that. The cowboys playing poker glanced up at me through clouds of tobacco smoke. I recognized some of these people from around town, or rather, I recognized who they used to be. So, my mom's memorial. She's not really dead, is she? I said, a wave of hope and relief overwhelming me. I thought I'd have to say goodbye to her today, but she'll be back, won't she? Smokes only smiled sadly. You won't find fuel for your steel carriage, partner, said Smokes. I'll give you a ride to the cemetery. I followed Smokes out to the parking lot where several horses were hitched. Where did you guys get all these horses? I asked. Oh, where there's cowpokes, there's horses, he replied. That's a rule of nature. Smokes fed the horse an apple and stroked her mane before bidding me to climb on behind him. I held on to his waist, which was pretty weird for me because we were never close like that, and we galloped off up the highway toward the middle of town. We passed the elementary school, which had been covered in radiation warning signs and barbed wire. Then we passed the old Coney Island restaurant, which had been converted to a one-room schoolhouse. Main Street's restaurants, law firms, and tattoo parlor had been replaced by a dry goods store, an ox stable, a wagoner, an apothecary. The barber was the same, but it looked like he also pulled teeth now. The park that I played in as a kid had been bulldozed to hell, and in its place was a brown dirt yard with scattered mounds and holes all clustered near the center. A new sign hung over the entrance on a wooden board, Lazarus Mound Cemetery. I guess we could have been more creative, Smokes said, but it's too late for couldas, I reckon. A group of cowboys, clad in black, stood over a dirt pile. They held their hats to their chest as the eulogy was read. Smokes followed me to my mother's fresh grave. I dropped my bouquet of flowers on top of it. Family only, said one of the cowboys, glaring at me. Uncle Matt, it's me, I said. He twirled his goatee and grimaced, revealing a new gold tooth. It's Billy Cobra Nash these days, he said. Didn't recognize you, son. I suppose you want to say a few words? He gestured to the mound. Well, I would, I said, but I'm pretty sure she'll pop out halfway through. That's no way to talk about your poor dead mother, said Great-Grandma Tess, who I hadn't seen since 2004 when she died from stroke. Except she wasn't Great-Grandma Tess. She was a short old man with a long rabbity mustache and 2 guns on either side. Let the kid grieve, Slim, said Cobra. The sun set on us. The resurrected cowboy versions of my family members became hungry and bored and set up a small campfire where they heated up coffee and beans and spun some yarns. I asked questions about the cowboy economy and how it could sustain itself in this Massachusetts town that didn't have that many cows, and they responded by cussing me out and telling me to get lost. City boy. I said I couldn't be a city boy because I was from here, and they took away my beans. Finally, after about an hour, there was rustling from the mound. Here she comes, said Cobra. The dirt shuffled and ran down the side of the mound, a miniature landslide. Finally, a gloved hand emerged. Then an arm, a dirty, dusty head crowned in a cowboy hat, burst from the pile, coughing. Well, butter my biscuits, if it ain't the cheat, just in time for dinner, said Slim, hands on his hips. My mom, who was now a dirt-covered cowboy named the Cheat, clicked his boots together to dislodge some stones from his spurs. Howdy. Miss me, fellas, the Cheat rasped, spitting pebbles into the fire. Mom? I said. The Cheat looked me over. They call me Vernon the Cheat Maddox now, my mom said. Why Maddox? I asked. Mom, what was wrong with Nguyen? Ain't a cowboy name, said Mom. A cowboy can't be Vietnamese? Listen, kid, said the Cheat, clapping me on the arm. I've had a long day, and to be frank, I can't abide a city slicker like you before I get my brew. Gotta fill up on beans and coffee or I'll be skinner than a jazz skeleton in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. I watched my mom walk away toward the fire, greeting the other cowboys like old friends. It's like she didn't even recognize me, I said, broken. Smokes patted me on the shoulder. That ain't your mother no more, pardner, he said. Same as I ain't Daryl Choi. What's the point of raising people from the dead if they're not themselves, I said. I reckon you've missed the essential theme of the pet cemetery premise, Smokes said. The point is, it's a curse, not a blessing. To the living, at least. Mr. Stephen King said sometimes dead is better. And here in Peabridge, we reckon he was right. I heard a metal click. I turned around to see Smokes' shotgun pointed square at my forehead. Whoa, I said. The cowboys at the fire turned to watch with dim interest, including my own mother. Daryl, hey, put that away. Dead is better, but you know what's best? Cowboy, he said. Cowboy is the best there is. Best there is, said the cowpokes around the fire in eerie unison. Wait, wait, wait. There was a bang. My vision filled with red, and then there was nothing. I saw and felt and heard nothing as Smokes watched my limp body fall backwards into the hole. He kicked dirt over me casually. He holstered his weapon. He sat down around the fire next to the others. How many bullets you got, Smokes? Asked the cheat through a mouthful of beans. Not enough to get him all the way through, Smokes replied, lighting his pipe. But enough to get him past Dracula, for sure. That's the one you gotta watch out for, the cheat said. I'll stand vigil with you, partner. You go home, Maddox. Wash that dust off. Tend to your herd. Be on the lookout for Edna, word is. She's still at large in places, Smokes said. She'll come around, said Slim. They always do. The campfire's embers rose up to the cloudy, dark sky. Smokes leaned back and tipped his hat low over his eyes. This town's got room for plenty more cowboys, he said. Around the fire, a dozen pairs of black, gleaming eyes turned toward the Lazarus mound, waiting. You know how life can be. Devastating. I am writing this and posting it because I need answers, and I think it's a way for me to cope. Or at least, that's what my therapist said. Bear with me, I am not much of a storyteller. So, about a month ago, me, my best friend and boyfriend went about an hour southwest of where we live to visit our friend. For the sake of privacy, I will call them Colby, Vincent, and Ashley. Ashley and I grew up together. She is kind, easygoing, and a crazy-ass sense of humor. Colby is my boyfriend of almost 2 years. He is patient, protective, and honestly the best person I know. And Vincent is spunky. He walks around wearing cowboy boots. He is loyal, personable, and adventurous. Vincent and Colby are best friends. So we've all become really close. We play Xbox together, camp, get drunk, etc. Part of the way we bonded so fast and got so close was because we all share a love of the paranormal. Shocking, I know. One weekend, like many others, Colby, Ashley, and I pack up in Colby's car to make the drive down to see Vincent and do our usual activities, getting drunk and ghost hunting. The town Vincent lives in is weird. I don't know how to explain it. It's just weird. Stuck in a different time. Almost everyone there is old. Or been there since they were born and will never leave. It was an old mining town, and the people there share stories of their hard times working the mines and how business boomed and crashed within years of each other. But what almost everyone shares stories of is the valley. A canyon just off the 2-lane road referred to by locals as the freeway is what the people in town call the valley, a dead-end canyon stretching no more than 15 miles. This is where all the mines were and still are. Now the town is dry and cold, the kind of cold that cuts through your skin and into your bone. The wind never stops. Summer, winter, spring, or fall, it's always windy. Especially in the valley, the wind whips off the rock walls and roars through the dead trees. Some nights in town, the wind coming out of the valley sounds like screams. The drive to see Vincent was as boring and ugly as usual. I sleep most the ride while Colby and Ashley bullshit about politics, religion, etc. I drift off to the start of another discussion I don't care enough to be a part of. Just as quickly as I'm asleep, I wake up to the sound of the wind hitting our car so hard I fear we might fly off the road. That's how I know we've made it. We meet Vincent at his house and make up a plan for the night, the spot we want to get dinner at and where we want to ghost hunt. It's a weekend, but in town it's dead. The hum of the neon sign outside the restaurant we come to every time we're in town is the only thing breaking the silence except the damn wind. As we sit down and order our usual dinner, Vincent tells us that he has somewhere he wants to show us. It's just up the valley. It's called The Devil's Playhouse. Just as those words escape his lips, the waitress on her way over with our pitcher drops and shatters the whole thing. She sheepishly apologizes, sweeps it up, but stops halfway. Did I hear you say the Devil's Playhouse? Sorry, it's just, I am new into town and have heard the rumors of that place, did you know? Vincent shoots her a look that's quick to shut her up, and she leaves. I asked him what the stories were about this place. He leans in close to us and whispers, well, as you guys know, the valley, well, actually, the whole town was built for the mines. So when the miners settled here, some weird people came with them. He glances around to make sure nobody is listening and lowers his voice even more. Well, the people would take, like, horses, cows, even the miners' fucking pets, and take them up to their spot and slit their throats and fucked up shit like that. They said they did it for the devil. He clears his throat and leaned back. But that's just an old rumor, who knows what happened, but either way, the place is freaky. Ashley looks around at us in a deep voice and says, that's what I'm going to do to you guys if you don't Venmo me for dinner. I laugh and roll my eyes. We finish dinner, pack up in the car. Fuck, Colby says, feeling around in his pockets. I lost my zins. Can we stop at a gas station, please? Vincent pulls off into a gas station that consists of one pump and a small shop. We go inside and I'm browsing around when I see Ashley bump into a tall, lanky, awkward-looking man, knocking the items in his hand to the floor. Oh, I'm so sorry, she says. The man turns around with a big smile on his face and says, no worries, ma'am, and picks up his car keys and a pack of cigarettes up off the floor. I watch as he walks out to the parking lot, gets in his nice brand new truck and drives away. Ashley has moved on to the next aisle when I realize I'm staring. Vincent walks up next to me. You ready? I asked him who that man was, and he says, Lance Cornell. Dude's nice as hell. He lives at the mouth of the valley. Funny enough, he owns the beer. You know the place we had dinner at tonight? I smile, and we all walk out the gas station and load back up into the car. In the car, Colby's puts a hand on my thigh and rubs his finger against my jeans. Ashley whips her head around from the front and says, you know what I think I've heard of this place? Yeah, like some kids went missing hiking up here and were never seen from again. She narrows her eyes and looks right at me with a mincing glance. Hey, stop that. She's lying to you. Nobody's gone missing. Vincent gives me a smile in the rearview mirror. The sun is just starting to go down when we get there. We're swapping scary stories the drive up, but as soon as we cross the threshold, the stories stop and a sense of dread fills the space the stories held. Vincent drives up to a gate with a giant no trespassing sign on it. Well, this is it. Now we just hike up a bit. Watch for cars too. This is like super illegal. Me and Ashley share a glance and she smiles with her reassuring kind smile and we start walking. Halfway up, Colby takes my hand and winks at me. He says, how you feeling? Scared? Don't be. I won't let anything happen to you. Plus, all this stuff is total bullshit, babe. He smiles and jogs up a little to catch up with the others. I stay behind. I am winded, cold, and uneasy. I hear a snap of a twig behind me and whip around. Holy fuck, what was that? My friends turn around and watch as a bunny crosses the trail behind me. False alarm, sorry guys. Vincent rolls his eyes and laughs. After a short 20-minute walk, the sun has completely set in the valley, and we turn on our flashlights to see the beast of a building standing in front of us. An abandoned mining building. Must have been storage or something, because the ones we drove past on the way in don't even hold a candle to this. The wind going through the windows makes it look like the building itself is shriving in the cold air of the wind. Wow, Ashley says with a grin. Well, come on in, mi casa es su casa, says Vincent as he stands in the doorway. All the windows and doors are gone. There is a hole in the floor that looks like it leads somewhere, but however people were getting down there has been gone for quite some time. Dude, imagine there is just someone living down there, Ashley says, and nudges me with a smile. What the fuck? What an odd thing to say. Ashley and Colby are taking pictures on her digital camera she carries with her everywhere. The odd thing is the place has no graffiti. It's actually clean. No glass or anything, I say out loud. Yeah. Well, nobody ever comes up here because, well, the cops are bored in a town like this, Vincent said like he was reading my mind. All right, fuckers, I say we split up, Colby says. All right, gang, let's look for clues. Ashley copies in a teasing voice. My heart starts to race. The building is only one floor if you exclude the hole in the ground. Just stay on the main floor and keep your light on just in case. Vincent tells us we all nod and walk our separate ways. I begin to walk around the corner of the general area we're in. I am looking around, still amazed at the cleanliness of this place. No dust, no leaves, nothing. It's wild. I turn around to see Colby right there. Ah, he screams. I shove him away and smack his chest. Idiot. He leans in and tries to kiss me, and as I lean into him, I hear aloud, "What the hell?" Ashley sounds scared. We run over to find her looking at the ground with fear in her eyes. We pan our flashlights down to what she's looking at. A dead fucking rabbit, fresh, bright red blood pouring out of the hole in its body where its head used to be. I look away and throw up in my mouth. "Dude, what the fuck?" Colby says. "What the fuck is right?" Ashley says, sounding scared. "Let's leave, I want to leave. Please, this is fucked up. This shit is like real, like what the fuck? We need to leave. It's the bunny from the trail." "What are we waiting for?" Ashley screams at us. I swallow my throw up and start walking to the door. The boys are standing there staring at it. As I walk away, I start to lose sight of them. It's so dark that I don't know how people would navigate without a source of light, and it's so quiet, almost peaceful. Wait a fucking minute, it's so quiet. What happened to the wind? My heart drops to my stomach, and a pit joins it. It's like we all notice it at the same time. The silence. Deafening. No rubbing of tree branches, no bugs, no hum of electricity, no sound of shoes on the floor, and most definitely no wind. "Wow," Colby says. "Can we go now?" asks Ashley. I pan my flashlight around to each of their faces. My heart is beating so loud, it's filling the silence. "Chill," Vincent says. "Don't freak yourself out, okay? It's probably nothing. Let's go. Okay, you're right, this was a mistake." He takes a step back, and as he does, I see a figure in the back hidden in the darkness take a step behind him. The figure smacks Vincent's phone out of his hands and onto the floor, silencing my heartbeat from my ears. "Holy fuck! Wait, what? Vincent!" Ashley screams. We all panic, getting closer to each other. Just then, the sound of footsteps on the floor running, no sprinting towards us. Colby yanks me out of the way, but he's not fast enough to grab Ashley, the figure running, picks her up in a single swoop, and I hear her cry out as his voice gets more and more distant. "Ash," I start to say, as Colby covers my mouth with his hand. We back up into the darkness, moving as quickly and quietly as we can. Suddenly, the floor underneath my feet is gone, and we fall right into the hole in the floor. Slamming my head against the cold, damp cement floor, I knock myself unconscious. I wake up to the sound of sobs and screams. It's not dark anymore. The main room of the building is lit by candles burning and surrounding me, us in a circle. We're all tied up, bound by our hands and feet, sitting next to each other. 3 hooded figures stand far enough away. The candlelight isn't showing their face. "What do you fucks want with us?" Colby yells. "You please let us go," begs Ashley. One of the men steps forward and into the candlelight. A bald man who looks to be 60 is carrying the head of the rabbit, the blood still dripping on the floor. He holds the head above each of us while muttering under his breath. The blood is dropping onto my face. Warm, wet, sticky, the metallic smell filling my nose. I gag and cry and shake and all the things. After they put the blood on Colby mine and Ashley's heads and faces, they stop at Vincent. One of the hooded figures step forward. A short, fat, hairy man in his 40s reaches out a hand towards Vincent. He mumbles something under his breath. Vincent, crying, looks at us and back at him and takes his hand. Tears streaming down his face, he says, "I can't do this. Please don't make me do this, please." "They're my friends, you assholes." The last robed man steps forward and the strong stench of cigarettes follows him. It's the man from the gas. He grabs Vincent's shoulder and says, "Vincent, we talked about this. Think of your mother, your sister. Do it for them. I promised you something, and I would never break a promise." Vincent wipes away the tears and backs up into the darkness. "Vincent!" Colby screams. What are you doing to him? What are you doing to us? Tears are gushing out of my eyes as I see the fear on Colby's face. Before Colby can say another word, his throat is slit, and blood is spewing out all over his clothes. He looks at me. His eyes widen with fear, and his body slumps over. To appease, they all say in unison. Just then, Vincent returns with container of lighter fluid. He drops it to the floor as he falls to his knees. A blood-curdling scream escapes his lips. No! I told you not him. You told me you wouldn't hurt him. Please don't. He is shaking and crying and holding Colby's limp body, his blood soaking onto Vincent's clothes. Cornell says something under his breath, and the other two drag Vincent away while he is kicking and screaming. Suddenly, the screaming stops. I am shaking. My heart is shattered. I'm so shocked I almost forget Ashley is next to me until I hear a whimper and see her bloody and shivering, a piss stain showing on her pants. The two men return, one of them picking up the gasoline while the other picks up matches. They begin to make a ring around us, and just as they're about to light it, Cornell mumbles something to the other two, and they pick me up and untie me. I try to run over to Ashley, but they yank me back. No, wait, I want to see her, please. What are you doing to my friends? Please, no. I can barely see through my tears. Run, the bald man says. Leave this town and don't ever come back. Before I can dispute the circle around, Ashley is ablaze, and she is screaming, screeching, crying. I can't take it anymore, so I run. I leap out the window, fall to my knees, but I don't stop. I get up, the wind is back. It's whipping the tears flowing down my face. My feet give under me, and I fall down the mountainside. I slam my head on the ground, my hands and bloody and scraped. I don't stop. I get up. I am just at the car when I stop. I turn back around and look up. I can hear loud chanting, rhythmic, and a scream like I've never heard. Something deep, something guttural, primal. A howl of sorts, and then light. A bright flash of light, and then it's all gone. And suddenly I can smell cigarettes. I get into Vincent's car. The thing is old. It barely stars, but it does, thank God. I sit there for a second, looking up at the building, and then I scream. I slam my hands on the horn. I cry, and I cry, and I cry. I slam on the gas and don't stop until I'm out of the valley, out of the town, until I'm back in my town. I show up at my local police station covered in blood. I tell them everything, and they write it down and speed away. Sirens on. Backup arriving, the whole 9 yards. They don't find anything but a circle of dust and ash on the ground. The police told the parents what happened, and I've been questioned multiple times, although my story never changed. They've held 3 funerals, but I didn't attend Vincent's. I couldn't and will never enter that town again. I didn't attend anyone's. So now I'm here, alone, haunted by the memories of that terrible night, in a fuck ton of therapy, on the news, in pain and suffering. I just don't understand why they didn't kill me. I wish they would have ended it all and killed me. Please kill me. Nobody believes me, but I know what happened. It all happened in that fucking valley. I sit here looking at the blue painted walls with the same vintage movie posters I've had since I was 13. This room has been my comfort zone since I can remember. Living in the basement, I have always had a sense of independence, even at early ages. I could customize it to my design. I never let my parents' views bleed in here. I am a religious person, but I don't need a cross on every wall, proverbs on every mantle, and paintings of Christ everywhere in between. Down here I had freedom, but now it seems like this will be my tomb. I write this not only to get out the raving anxieties eating at my insides like a starved tiger, but to perhaps rationalize what is the completely irrational. My parents are the typical conservative Christian type, real Republican poster children. Growing up, my Sundays were completely haunted by 3-hour-long morning sermons from a pastor with eyes that wandered to a disturbingly downward. You would think my mom's eyes were on her chest if you even saw one conversation between the two. The rest of my early childhood ends up being a blur of Sunday studies and so many prayers that when I even see a plate of food being set on a table, not that I have for a long time, my hands reflexively go into a prayer without me even realizing it. Once I got a little older, around 16, I started to get sick of it. My friends would always post pictures of them at the beach on Sunday in bikinis. that my mom would call an exorcist for if she ever saw me in. Through months of rolling eyes and dirty looks during Sunday service, my mom finally confronted me. "Are you questioning your faith?" she asked, coming into my room unannounced one night a few months back. "No, Mom, I still believe in him. I just don't know why I can't have faith and do things my friends do at the same time." I responded, still hiding my true feelings. "Honey, on the day of judgment we all must come to terms with our transgressions and make repent of our earthly sins. It is a fallen world after all. Ever since the serpent tricked Eve in the garden, we have had to learn to coexist with our natural-born sin by," she began. I knew another sermon was coming. I needed an out. "You're right, Mom," I said, putting my hand on hers where she sat at the end of my bed. "I was just falling into temptation. I won't let it happen again, trust me," I said with my best fake smile I could muster. "I trust you, sweetheart. You know I was once young too, believe it or not," she said with a smile and a giggle before getting up to kiss me on the forehead and saying goodnight. For the next few weeks, I just tried to keep a low profile, do my best to put on a happy face around the creepy pastor, but I slowly felt my faith slipping away. Service after service, I became more and more detached and began to seriously question who exactly my parents consider as their faith. Do they really believe in God, or is it just a helpful excuse to control my life further? Last week I had enough. On Sunday night, my friends texted me that they were going to a friend's house to smoke weed and hang out. Sundays are lockdown days. I am absolutely not allowed to see any of my friends all day, as it's reserved entirely for family and prayer. However, living in the basement grants some privileges, chief among which is my window. The screen door covers the window but can easily be popped out of place. So around 11 p.m., after my parents were fast asleep, I snuck out and bolted to my friend's car, waiting for me in the alley behind our house. "Hey, choir girl," Ashley said as I jumped in the back seat like I was fleeing the scene of bank robbery. "Drive, get me the fuck out of here," I said, tapping her shoulder relentlessly. Once we pulled up to Ashley's friend Megan's house, she stopped, put the car in park, and grabbed a baggie with a joint out of her backpack. "If I'm going to be in the room with Josh now that he and Megan are dating, I'm going to need this," she said, fiddling with her lighter, trying to get a spark before taking a puff and handing me the freshly lit joint. I have never smoked before, never even in the same room as someone who smoked cigarettes before. My immediate reaction was to say, "No, thank you," I said, waving my hand in the air. Ashley shrugged her shoulders. "Suit yourself," she said, taking another hit. We sat talking for a minute while she finished the joint. "Your parents still running a dictatorship?" Ashley asked after a brief moment of silence in the conversation. "Yeah, the older I get, the more they are convinced that whenever I'm out with friends, I'm worshiping the devil or having orgies with every guy in town," I responded, rolling my eyes. "I mean, not on Sundays, at least," Ashley said before immediately bursting out laughing at her own joke. I laughed with her, and once we both caught our breath, I stared at what little weed was left in her joint. "You know what? I'm dead if I get caught regardless," I said, holding my hand out to accept the joint. "Look at my choir girl go," Ashley responded. "You can finish it, my treat." I took one puff and immediately thought I swallowed an ember. My throat burned like a building on fire, and I coughed until my eyes watered and I was gasping for air like a drowning man. Ashley laughed and said, "It's okay, you won't have virgin lungs forever." After coughing my way through the rest of the joint, we went inside. What little I remember mostly consisted of me being slumped on the couch like a weighted blanket was draped over me, even though all I had was my hoodie and leggings on. When Ashley dropped me off a block from my house, I got out and tried to smell every part of me to make sure the weed smell had stayed in the car. As I turned the corner and saw the living room light on in my house, I felt the ground fall from beneath me. My heart raced so fast I thought it would never stop. I spent the next 10 minutes walking back and forth trying to think of what to do, until I decided that if I try to sneak back in through the window, maybe they won't notice. Walking to my backyard, I caught a glimpse of my living room, and my father was standing up in his pajamas, walking back and forth, talking on the phone. My mother was sitting on the couch with tears running down her cheeks, crouched over in prayer. At that moment, I knew I was in trouble. My mom was in tears, and my dad was rubbing his neck out of stress, not looking far from tears either. After sneaking back into my window, I lay in my bed waiting to either fall asleep or be yelled at by my parents. I ended up falling asleep. Nothing too unusual happened during my sleep. I didn't hear any strange noise or loud banging, but when I woke up, the stairs and door that led to the living room were gone. What was once my staircase and the only way out other than my window was just flat ground, covered in the same hardwood my floor was. Jumping out of bed, I ran to what now was solid ground, trying to make any sense of the situation. How do my stairs just disappear? How did this happen overnight? And how didn't I get woken up by it? An immediate sense of claustrophobia overtakes me. I feel the weight of a truck on my chest as I struggle for breath. I thought of my window, and before the thought fully registered in my mind, I had jumped on my bed and pulled on the window with every inch of my strength. It wouldn't budge, and with a horror I can't describe to this day, I noticed the window was welded shut. I immediately grab any item in reach and throw it at my window, eventually picking up my entire wooden nightstand and slamming it against the glass. It didn't even crack. I got at this for what may have been hours. Eventually, I collapsed out of exhaustion. The only thing I can do now is scream. "Mom, Dad, help me, I'm trapped!" I shout until my voice breaks and tears fill my eyes like a bucket key in a hurricane. They didn't respond. No one came for me. My phone doesn't have service or Wi-Fi. I have a TV and old classic DVDs my dad owns, but that's it. No food. Only water source is the sink in my bathroom. I spend the rest of the day pacing back and forth, intermittently screaming out for help until I notice a figure walking past my window. I jump up to the window and start banging on the glass like a caged chimpanzee. It's my mom. She's sitting on our backyard furniture, just staring into blank space. It looks like she has been crying for hours. Her eyes were blood red and tired. Her face was puffy and downtrodden. I bang even harder on the glass, screaming at her. "Mom, I'm here, please let me out!" She doesn't even move a muscle. What the fuck is happening? Is she ignoring me? Can she just not hear me? There's no way she can't hear me. I'm screaming as loud as I can, and the windows aren't that thick. Did they do this? Is that why she's crying? What kind of twisted parents would do this to their own daughter? I remember laying in bed with these questions racing through my mind over and over. Once night fell, I was still trapped. I laid in bed trying to sleep, hoping it was just a bad dream, or I would wake up and my stairs would be back and everything would be okay. They made their point. I won't ever sneak out or touch weed again. With unimaginable dread, the next morning I woke up and my stairs were still gone. I looked out my window again. Nothing. No one. Just the same patio furniture we have had since I was a toddler. I looked down and noticed all the clocks in my room and even on my phone had stopped. They all froze like a lake in the winter at 3:33 in the morning. The only way I could tell time now was through sundown and sunrise. I tried screaming again. I screamed and I screamed until my vocal cords were about to snap like old brake lines. I'll never forget the panic, like coming out of a car crash. I knew I absolutely had to do something, but I was fighting in a world I didn't even understand. The threat I faced didn't even have any direct attack. It stood ominously in front of me. I can't quite describe it, but just seeing that blank wall in the corner felt like a figure staring me down at the edge of my bed at every waking second. My panic quickly turned into a blind rage. Thoughts of the physical and emotional pain I would subject my parents for putting me here drove me as I picked up my battered nightstand and flung it at the space my door used to be. Over and over with each crash against the wall, the nightstand breaking into smaller and smaller pieces, but the wall stood, not even a chip in the paint. I push my dresser over to the torturous space of nothing and start slamming the now scattered wooden pieces directly into the wall with all the strength I could muster. Nothing. I slumped down and caught my breath. There I sat, alone, trapped in the place I once found comfort in, but now see as a twisted prison cell playing tricks on my psyche. For the rest of the day, I just laid in bed and watched some of the old DVDs I had on my shelf. The next day, I spent what I think was hours just looking out my window. It was fall now. When I became trapped, it was the middle of summer. How did it fast forward 2 months in a single night? My only perception of time was the daylight of my window. Had I really been in here that long? It seems every time I blink my eyes, I lose days. But is it really a loss? What kind of life am I living if I'm just a rat in a lab being experimented on by some demented god? From my perspective at the time of writing this, I have been down here for 25,430 sunsets, not counting the first few nights I wasn't keeping track. I'm not hungry, I'm not thirsty, and so much time has passed in my window that I don't even know the people in my backyard anymore. My parents died years ago, but yesterday for me. I can't ask for help. I know better now. I have shouted, cried, broken every piece of art and furniture in my room, and the only change has been a chip in the paint size of my fingernail. This isn't over me smoking weed. I don't even know if this is my parents doing. How could it have been? Ever since the night my stairs vanished, I haven't heard a single creak from upstairs. People walk past every day. What would they say if they learned the suburban home they just walked past has had a girl in the basement for over 60 years? For the first few nights I remember praying, but I now realize I was praying to my tormentor. If there is a God, he's forgotten me. Roger disappeared without a trace. His car still in the driveway and not a single thing taken from the house, Mr. Whitaker said in a gruff voice. The weight of his words lingered in the air like a distant echo of something forgotten. My wife Alara and I had just moved into a new house in a quiet town, nestled in a new state far from the suffocating grip of our hyper-religious parents. They hated the idea of us living together unmarried, and their disapproval had turned crazy, leaking our phone number and address to their church members, who bombarded us with calls and letters day and night. It became too much. We scraped together every dollar we could and found what seemed like a miracle, a house for sale at an unbelievable price. The young couple selling it had been unusually pushy, eager to close the deal, but we couldn't pass it up. A fresh start away from everything we'd left behind felt like the lifeline we desperately needed. Now, here we were, having dinner with Mr. and Mrs. Whitaker, an older couple who had lived in the neighborhood for decades. They'd invited us over as a gesture of welcome, and we were glad to have someone familiar in this unfamiliar place. He was the owner before the young couple you bought from, Mr. Whitaker continued, swirling his wine. They got it cheap, probably because the bank didn't know what to do with it. Roger was gone, just like that. Funny, though, those kids only lasted about a year before they left, too. But I don't judge or pry. He took a long sip of wine, his eyes flicking briefly toward Mrs. Whitaker. Alara reached for my hand under the table, her grip tightening slightly. Did they ever find out what happened to him? She asked, her voice tinged with hesitation. He shook his head slowly. Nah, never. It was as if he just stopped existing one day. The room felt heavier. Mrs. Whitaker, sensing our unease, spoke up with a soft smile, her tone gentle, as though trying to smooth over the cracks Mr. Whitaker had widened. Oh, love, don't let him scare you. Roger was a strange man, always kept to himself. It's a big world out there. He probably just went back to his hometown or started over somewhere else. Nothing ever happens here. It's a beautiful, quiet town. Their words stayed with us long after we left that evening, even as we thanked them for their hospitality. It was comforting to know someone nearby, but the story lingered in my mind. As the days passed, we settled further into the house, falling deeper in love with its quirks and the freedom it represented. It was the clean slate we had dreamed of. 3 months passed, and life felt easy, refreshing even. But then, one evening, everything changed. We were getting ready for dinner at a little local restaurant we'd affectionately nicknamed Our Spot. I was rifling through the clothes in our bedroom closet, searching for something decent to wear, when I noticed it. A small, faded, pale blue door, no taller than 4 feet, stood behind the hanging jackets as though it had always been there. Its wood was worn and cracked, its paint peeling to reveal darker, older layers beneath. My hands froze mid-motion. Time seemed to stall as I stared at it, my mind grappling with the sheer impossibility of its presence. "Ilara!" I called louder than I intended. "Baby, come here." She appeared moments later, wrapping her arms around me from behind in a playful hug. "What is it?" Her words trailed off as she followed my gaze to the door. "What the hell?" she whispered, stepping closer. We stood there in silence, staring at it. We had been living in this house for months. I had used this closet every day. There was no way we could have missed this. "It's got to lead to storage or something," I said, my voice shaky, trying to rationalize what I saw. "Maybe a heater?" Alara's face was tight with unease. "Finn, no. There's no way we wouldn't have noticed this, even when we first moved in. It wasn't here." I reached out and pulled the door open. It swung silently, its hinges unnervingly smooth. On the other side was a small, dimly lit room, no larger than a child's bedroom. A single bulb dangled from the ceiling, its weak glow barely illuminating the space. The walls were plain and gray, with no shelves or furniture, just emptiness. "Looks like it's just extra storage," I muttered, unsure even as I said it. Ilara crossed her arms and shrugged, but the tension in her body told me she wasn't convinced. "I don't know, Finn. I don't like this. How could we have missed it?" We didn't know what to make of it, but as the days passed, it became easier to ignore. The door was just there, a strange, inexplicable feature of the house we tried to dismiss. But a week later, everything changed again. Ilara was at work, and I was home alone, tidying up the bedroom. I reached into the closet to hang a shirt, and my hand froze midair. The door was gone. Instead, the wall behind the clothes was smooth and beige, as though the door had never existed. My heart raced as I pushed the clothes aside, running my hands over the surface. "Where is it?" I whispered to myself, knocking against the wall in disbelief. The absence of the door felt more unnatural than its presence had. By the time Ilara got home, I had turned to the only thing I could rely on: beer. When she walked through the door, I sat in the kitchen, nursing my third one. "Tough day?" she teased, dropping her bag by the counter. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," I mumbled, shaking my head. "I just have to show you." As I led her down the hallway to our bedroom, her face softened and curiosity flickered in her expression. But as we reached the middle of the hallway, we both froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing where it absolutely should not have been. Its faded paint and cracked wood seemed to mock us. We exchanged a look, a shared moment of disbelief that we couldn't put into words. Slowly, I turned back to the door. Without waiting, I pulled it open. This time, the door revealed a small study. An old wooden desk sat at the center, a single candle on top casting flickering shadows across the walls. Above, a narrow staircase spiraled upward, lined with bookshelves crammed with hundreds of dusty volumes. "Holy," Ilara began. "Shit," I finished. We stood at the threshold, too curious to leave despite our confusion. The room exuded an eerie beauty. The desk, scratched and weathered by time, seemed to whisper stories of the past. The candle's light danced across the room, casting an inviting yet mysterious glow that beckoned us further inside. We were bookworms through and through, and whatever questions we had about the door and its impossibility faded as our love for text took over. Without hesitation, we moved to the shelves, fingers trailing across the worn spines of novels and tomes. The books were familiar yet different. I pulled out a copy of The Return of the King, the final volume of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and flipped to the ending, eager to relive one of my favorite climactic moments. But instead of Frodo's triumphant destruction of the ring, I found a dark twist. Sauron reclaiming it, plunging Middle-earth into eternal darkness under his reign. My breath caught in my throat. "Ilara, these endings, they're not right." She glanced up from a worn copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, her brow furrowed. "You're kidding," she said, though her tone betrayed her disbelief. She flipped through the book, her face growing more unsettled as she read. In this version, Alice never returned home. Instead, she became trapped in Wonderland, the once whimsical world turning dark and cruel as she realized she was part of an endless nightmare. It wasn't just those books. To Kill a Mockingbird ended with the town succumbing to its worst instincts, Atticus ostracized, Scout left alone in a place consumed by hate. Each book we read carried the same unnerving thread, familiar stories twisted into something dark and hopeless. We couldn't explain it. The books looked authentic, and the writing matched the author's voices, but the content wasn't right. Desperate for answers, we took a few of the books to a local bookstore. The owner was intrigued but skeptical, her raised brow suggesting she thought we were playing a prank. It didn't matter. This was the late 80s, and there was no internet to search for answers. As days turned into weeks, the pale blue door became part of our lives. We'd visit the study often, reading the altered books late into the night, our conversations circling back to our differences. The strangeness of it all became our new normal until, one day, the house offered something new. While rummaging through the shelves in the study, I discovered a hidden panel behind the desk. Inside was an old, withered book with no title or author. Its leather cover was cracked and faded. The book smelled of mildew and age, and as I opened it, I found a collection of dark, grim fairy tales I had never heard of. One story stood out, its words lingering in my mind like a faint echo. That night, as we lay in bed, I read it to Alara. In a realm where reality's edges softly fray, a hidden sanctum veiled by twilight exists. Here, the waters, clear as mirrors, do not reflect the heavens, but a void teeming with whispering stars. Light and darkness perform a delicate ballet of shadows and luminescence, revealing and obscuring truths. Spinning from unseen energies, this domain fluctuates between tranquility and a silent prison, resonating with the cosmic whispers of those drawn to explore its mysteries. The grand observatory above once pierced the celestial veil, its lens aligning mortal fates with the arcane dance of stars and shadowed voids. Below, the mirrors do more than reflect. They capture the very essence of those who dare gaze into them, holding echoes of souls adrift in time and space. As the sanctuary breathes with the quiet sighs of ancient walls, it watches with an unblinking, omniscient gaze. Hidden in the empty spaces, a ravenous entity feeds on the hushed fears and secret desires of those ensnared by its ancient allure. Alara stared at me with wide eyes as I jotted the words down on a scrap of paper. "What do you think it means?" she whispered. "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know what any of this means. Do you think we should tell someone?" She hesitated, then suggested, "The Whitakers? Maybe they'll believe us, or at least see it with their own eyes." It was a good idea. The following weekend, we invited the Whitakers over for dinner. After a pleasant meal, we gave them a tour of the house, steering them toward the hallway where the door was. Alara and I exchanged a nervous glance as we approached. But when we turned the corner, we froze. The door wasn't there. All we saw was the plain beige wall, unremarkable and innocuous. Alara and I tried to mask our shock, plastering on fake smiles as the Whitakers complimented the house. After they left, though, we were at a loss. "The house," Alara whispered, her voice trembling. "It's messing with us." We stayed up late that night, arguing over what to do. Were we going crazy? Was the house truly supernatural? Should we leave? But even as the fear grew, we couldn't deny the house hadn't harmed us. Not yet. Our argument was cut short by a sound, a distorted creak, like a door opening through static. It echoed faintly from the living room. We walked in cautiously, and there it was again. The pale blue door. This time it stood behind the television, its wood faded and cracked, the edges glinting faintly in the dim light. I wish I could say I was scared, but at that moment I was consumed by curiosity. I moved the TV aside, gripped the handle, and pulled the door open once more. It led to a dark observatory, a room unlike anything I'd ever seen. The air felt colder here, sharper. A massive antique telescope stood at the room's center, surrounded by desks cluttered with star charts and scattered notes. Planets I didn't recognize hung suspended from the ceiling, their surfaces glowing faintly in the moonlight that streamed through the domed windows. "Whoa," Alara murmured, her voice tinged with awe. We explored the room in silence, our unease momentarily replaced by wonder. The telescope, though ancient in design, was shockingly functional. I peered through the lens, expecting familiar constellations, but the stars weren't ours. The sky beyond the telescope was alien, a canvas of unnatural phenomena. A black star pulsed faintly in the distance, its void-like surface swallowing the surrounding light. Nearby, a shattered planet's exposed core glowed with an eerie, molten heat, its fractured surface hinting at cataclysmic destruction. Adjacent to this desolation, another planet teemed with life, but not as we know it. Its surface writhed with chaotic, erratic appendages, moving with deliberate, unsettling intent. "Ilara," I whispered, stepping back from the telescope. "This isn't our sky." She took her turn at the lens, her breath catching. Our unease grew palpable. Whatever this observatory was intended to reveal, it showed us vistas we were never meant to see. Scenes from a cosmos where the laws of nature were grotesquely twisted. As the reality of these discoveries settled in, the lines between what was real and what was part of the house's mysterious influence blurred. The telescope revealed sights that should have been awe-inspiring, but instead filled me with a sense of smallness, like I was staring at something I wasn't meant to see. I couldn't stop drawing them, charting them out as if mapping the skies might somehow make sense of it all. One night, while lying awake, the distorted creak of the door returned. This time, it came from our bathroom. I shook Alara awake, and together we walked to the bathroom. There, embedded in the shower wall, was the pale blue door again, its wood as worn and faded as before. I hesitated for a moment before pulling it open. We stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with a soft, white glow emanating from nowhere and everywhere all at once. Large mirrors lined the walls on either side, their surfaces pristine at first glance. The floor beneath us was cold, reflecting the light like polished obsidian. There was a path forward leading into the unknown. As we walked, the mirrors began to shift. At first, they were normal reflections of ourselves moving through the space. But then, they started to change. Some mirrors stretched tall and thin, while others were jagged and cracked. One showed my reflection lagging slightly behind me like it was struggling to keep up. Another displayed me smiling faintly, only I wasn't smiling. "Ilara," I said nervously, my eyes darting to her reflection. But she wasn't beside me in the glass. I turned quickly, relieved to see her still there, but she was frozen, staring into a mirror. "Finn," she said softly, her voice shaking. "You're not in this one." The longer we walked, the more surreal it became. The mirrors began reflecting impossible things, hallways that didn't exist, and scenes from our childhoods. One mirror showed me as a child, standing alone in a dimly lit room. My heart raced as I approached a particularly distorted mirror at the end of the hallway. There, a cracked mirror lay under a flickering light, casting an uneven, stuttering glow. From a distance, it was hard to make out the details, but a dark, menacing presence seemed to crowd the surface. As I drew closer, I heard a muffled voice. It was mine, coming from the other side of the glass. My own reflection was pressing its face against the mirror, sobbing uncontrollably. "You've got to help us!" It sobbed, its voice muffled yet unmistakably my own. "Ilara, are you seeing this?" I said, not taking my eyes off the reflection. When she didn't respond, I turned to her. She was transfixed by a mirror where her own reflection crouched in the fetal position. "We're trapped in here," her reflection whispered. "It won't let us out." The air grew heavy and thick with an overwhelming sense of dread. As we backed away, The mirrors around us began to shift again. The reflections weren't ours anymore. They cried, their sobs filling the room, then laughed, a chilling, hollow sound that echoed endlessly. And then, silence. That's when the lights began to go out, one by one, starting from the far end of the hallway. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Alara's hand. We bolted back toward the door, the darkness chasing us, swallowing the mirrors and the path behind us. The sound of shattering glass filled the air, though nothing broke. We stumbled through the door and slammed it shut, gasping for air. "What the fuck is with this house?" I said between breaths. "I don't know," Alara said, her voice trembling. "But I'm starting not to like it. That was too much." The pale blue door stayed in the bathroom for weeks after that. We avoided it by using the guest bathroom instead. It became a symbol of unease, a thing neither of us wanted to confront. The house felt different now, less like a curiosity and more like a trap. We talked about selling it, about leaving everything behind, but we always stopped short of actually making plans. A part of us didn't want to admit how deeply the house had gotten under our skin. One day, as I was hanging up clothes in our bedroom closet, I froze. There it was again, the pale blue door, standing exactly where we'd first found it. I called for Alara, and she joined me, her expression mirroring my own apprehension. "What do you think it leads to this time?" I asked. "Are you serious?" she replied. "It could be anything, a twisted garden, another world, maybe a theater showing some warped version of movies we love. Who knows?" "Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Alara bit her lip, her curiosity warring with her fear. I could see it in her eyes. She wanted to know as much as I did. "Maybe just a peek," she said finally. I nodded and pulled the door open. It swung silently, as it always did. The room beyond was eerily reminiscent of the first room we had found, but this time there was no ceiling, no walls. The single light bulb lay on the ground, casting a faint, lonely glow. The floor beneath us was like glass, perfectly smooth and reflective. As I stepped inside, the sound of my footsteps broke the silence. Splish, slosh, plop. It was like stepping on a shallow puddle, though no water clung to my shoes. Alara followed me, and together we walked into the void. The vibrations from our steps rippled outward, distorting our reflections on the floor. We walked for what felt like hours, the light from the bulb growing fainter with each step. Our curiosity outweighed our fear, and we decided to return the next day, better prepared. We planned to tie a rope to an anchor in the closet and bring a flashlight to see how far we could go. The next day, we hooked up the rope and ventured further into the abyss, holding each other's hands. The flashlight wasn't much use, but it gave us a small sense of security as we continued deeper. Every now and then, we looked back to see the dwindling light from the door, a tiny beacon in the vast darkness. Splish, slosh, plop. The sound of our steps on the wet-sounding floor filled the void. I shook my head, trying to catch my breath, but before I could respond to Alara's inquiry about the size of this place, I turned back toward the door. My heart stopped. The light spilling from the doorway was dimming, shrinking until it vanished completely. The sound of the door closing echoed like a gunshot in the silent expanse, leaving my ears ringing. I froze, paralyzed by fear. Then, without warning, the bulb shattered. Glass sprayed across the floor, plunging us into complete darkness. My flashlight flickered once before dying, leaving only the sound of our ragged breathing to fill the void. Then, behind us, came a sound. It moved slowly, wetly, like something dragging itself through thick, viscous mud. The squelch of movement sent a chill up my spine, and just as the noise ceased, a deafening splash echoed as though something massive had dropped into the water. Squelch, slosh, plop. "Alara, run!" I screamed, grabbing her hand. The air behind us grew warmer and more stifling, a sign that something was rapidly closing the distance. We ran, following the rope as best we could. The faint tremors beneath our feet were the only reassurance that we were moving in the right direction. My mind raced. and panic blinded me to everything except the desperate need to escape. The splashing grew erratic and violent, as did whatever it was gained on us. "Jesus Christ, keep going, Alara!" I screamed, my throat raw. The rope snapped, leaving us directionless momentarily, but we stumbled forward. Then finally, we slammed into the door. We pushed it open and spilled into the closet. I threw my body weight against the door, desperate to close it, but it wouldn't budge. Something on the other side was pushing back, clawing, fighting to keep it open. A sharp, searing pain shot through my shoulder as its claws tore into me, the heat behind the door unbearable now. Blood ran down my arm, soaking my shirt. "Go back to hell, you fucker!" Alara screamed, throwing herself against the door to help me. It became a brutal struggle, one side pulling, the other pushing, a horrific tug of war for control. The thing clawed at me again, deeper this time, and I screamed, a mix of pain, fear, and raw desperation. Its guttural, animalistic wails echoed through the door, and then suddenly the resistance stopped. The door slammed shut with a force that shook the closet. We collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. The silence was deafening for a moment, then broken by a loud bang against the other side of the door. Whatever it was still there, throwing itself against the wood, trying to break through. Each impact made the walls tremble. "Ilara, let's go," I said, clutching my bleeding shoulder. She helped me to my feet, and we exited the house. That was the last night we ever spent there. We tried everything. We reported a break-in to the police, but when they inspected the house, the door was gone. There was no evidence, no explanation. Frustrated and fearful, we stayed with the Whitakers for a few nights. Then in cheap motels and sometimes even in our car. The thought of burning the house crossed our minds more than once. But something stopped us. Maybe fear or guilt. The door became more capricious as the days passed, appearing in unexpected places with growing urgency. It would show up under our bed, on the ceiling, behind mirrors, initially quiet with faint knocking that escalated into loud, desperate banging. The encounters became too frequent, too terrifying to ignore. Eventually, we put the house up for sale. We were young and broke, and the house was all we had. It became harder to justify the truth, even to ourselves. We told the realtor we were relocating and that it was too much of a house for us. And when the offer came, a young couple with a little girl no older than 6, we accepted. As we emptied the house, the door appeared less and less. The banging and the faint knocking all stopped as we packed. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was watching us go. That was years ago. Alara doesn't talk about it anymore, but it never left me. I've carried the weight of what we did and left behind. A few months ago, I looked up the address on Google Earth. The house is still standing. In the street view image, there's a family unloading boxes. A man and woman smiling with 2 kids playing in the yard. If you ever stumble upon a door that seems out of place, a door that leads to realms beyond the grasp of your understanding, to dimensions that twist and shatter reality, don't open it. Some doors are not meant to be opened. Growing up, I attended what I thought was a charismatic church that, in hindsight, I realize was an apocalyptic cult. They had a lot of strange rituals and customs, but none more important than speaking in tongues. The church believed that if one prayed and begged hard enough, and if they were worthy, they would be able to speak in the language of heaven, and by doing so, it would be a sign of a divine presence residing inside of you, and that once you had this gift, you would be raptured and spared from the coming apocalypse on earth and the eternal torment of the afterlife. If you hadn't yet spoken in tongues, you wouldn't go to heaven when the rapture, the moment when the saved ascended to heaven, occurred. You'd be left on earth to experience the apocalypse, and when you died, you'd burn in hell for eternity. That's a lot for a kid to process. The way to get this gift of the Spirit was to go up to the front of the church during the altar call, which happened toward the end of every service, right after the collection plate was passed. The congregation, traumatized by the pastor's frequent and vivid descriptions of the eternal torment awaiting the unsaved, would gather around the altar, praying for the gift of tongues for themselves or members of the church who hadn't yet received it. Those who didn't have it were instructed to pray, praise God. and beg for the gift. We'd do this regularly, desperately, and the altar calls could last for hours. Imagine it. Children and adults all crowded around the red-carpeted steps of the altar, screaming, spraying saliva, sobbing, praying, sweating, and placing their hands on each other, all pleading for this gift, genuinely expecting the rapture to happen at any moment. Honestly, I spent most of my childhood and early teens trying to receive this elusive gift. I spent countless hours at the altar, begging and pleading with God to grant me the one thing that would save me from hell. Night after night, surrounded by screaming adults, I begged God until my voice was raw. To add insult to injury, it seemed like at every altar call, someone around me received the gift. To my left or to my right, someone would begin babbling incoherently, collapse to the ground, and then be helped up to their feet by a celebrating congregation. But despite all my efforts and sincerity, each night it was denied to me. Eventually, the crowd around the altar would disperse. Late at night, often around midnight, the service would finally end, and we'd go home. I'd spend the drive back staring out the car window at the night sky, my clothes damp with sweat, and my throat sore from pleading with a God who refused to answer. Growing up, the fear of hell, the apocalypse, and eternal damnation was a real force in my life. I can remember times when my mom came home late from work, and I was convinced she'd been raptured, leaving me behind. I'd hide in my closet, clutching some sort of improvised weapon, a broom, a steak knife, etc., certain that the damned would soon kick in the front door. For what purpose? Maybe to eat me or sacrifice me to Satan. I wasn't sure what the damned did, but I knew it couldn't be good. All this made for an interesting, high anxiety, and, at times, sleep-deprived childhood. When I was around 16, the pastor started preaching that the rapture was particularly imminent. We began having service every night about the coming apocalypse, and the importance of speaking in tongues for the unsaved. The pastor warned that hell would be infinitely worse for people like me who knew the truth, but hadn't accepted the gift. This was especially frustrating for me. I was trying so hard. After the collection plate was passed, we had the inevitable altar call, and at each of them I tried harder and harder to speak in tongues. But it still wasn't happening. I started to think maybe I was immune or something. Finally, after an especially long altar call, the pastor took me aside and told me, in a voice filled with compassion, concern, and perhaps a hint of exasperation, that if I just repeated the word hallelujah over and over again, God could use it as a foothold to enter my heart and grant me the gift. At the next altar call, I gave it a try. I knelt at the altar, shouting hallelujah over and over again. I was helped by an older man in the church who often mentored and prayed with the young boys, either one-on-one at his house, which he preferred, or at the altar. He considered this his calling. This oddly, overly affectionate man, a self-proclaimed prayer warrior, whispered words of encouragement in my ear as he knelt behind me, rubbing his hands tenderly across my sweating back and shoulders. Hallelujah! I shouted, again and again. My arms waved, my body swayed, and my knees ached. My throat was raw, and my voice was fading. The words began to run together, syllables dropping and merging. This only excited the people around me, especially the man behind me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I kept shouting faster and faster. Exhausted, the words blurred into nonsense. Around me, the church members screamed and prayed with ecstatic fervor. The pastor, now kneeling in front of me, tangled her fingers in my hair with one hand, grabbed my chin with the other, and brought her fleshy face close to mine, pressing her puckered lips against my ear. "No, say it like this," she whispered, her breath hot, moist, and intrusive. And then she began repeating the word hallelujah, improvising like a jazz musician, creating her own excited babble of syllables to accompany mine. Behind me, the man prayed harder, his breath hot on my neck, his body pressed close to mine. His hands moved roughly over my shoulders and back. He whispered in my ear, urging me to pray harder, harder, to let it inside me. Hallelujah! Hallelujah! I tried to keep shouting, but my voice faltered, my words turning to mush. The crowd erupted in a frenzy of excitement. The word blurred, lost its meaning, became a nonsensical noise. My throat burned, my body trembled. The pastor kept whispering in my ear, but her voice seemed to change. The word she kept repeating was now unrecognizable. The first syllable, a percussive exhalation. The second, a wheezing gasp. The third, obscenely stretched out. The last, almost a cry of pain. Her wet lips squirmed against my ear like worms. I felt her tongue in my ear, her voice in my head, and suddenly something shifted. The air grew thick and cold. The sounds around me suddenly muffled and distant. I felt like I was submerged in dark water. A strange presence loomed all around me. No, inside me. A watching, waiting, something. I felt 1,000,000 miles away, and a coldness crept into my chest, an internal ocean of black water teeming with something dark and squirming, rising up my throat and bursting out of my mouth. It hurt. I started screaming. We all seemed to be screaming in unison, and the lights were flickering, and suddenly I was being helped to my feet. I had apparently blacked out, collapsing face forward onto the steps of the altar. It wasn't an unusual occurrence at the church. They called it being slain by the Spirit. I had rug burns on my forehead for weeks. Still, as I came to, all around me, everyone was ecstatic. "You've got it!" someone shouted, their hands gripping my arms and shoulders. Everyone was happy. I was being congratulated, showered with love. And in the middle of it all, someone, I don't know who, whispered in my ear, "It's inside you now." And I felt a strange chill. I knew I should be happy. I tried to convince myself I was, but I felt different. Hollowed out, violated in a way I couldn't quite grasp or articulate. Later, before the service ended, the pastor asked me to come up to the pulpit to make an announcement. Numb, exhausted, and uncertain, I walked up. As I neared the pulpit, I glanced at the pastor. Our eyes met, and I still remember her expression. Though she smiled, her face seemed smug and sly, as though the two of us were co-conspirators. She nodded toward the pulpit, silently encouraging me to play along. I stepped up and looked out at the congregation, the only friends and community I had ever known. Their upturned faces were expectant, like children waiting for a story. I made my choice. "I spoke in tongues," I said into the microphone. My voice was raw and my throat was sore, but the declaration boomed around the church with a confidence I didn't feel. The congregation erupted in applause and shouts of "Amen" and "Praise the Lord." Their words blended into an indecipherable babble that sounded like tongues. Hallelujah. But I wasn't exactly sure what it was that I'd done. I wasn't sure what I'd let in. That night I couldn't sleep. My room felt suffocating, the air thick with something unseen, some new and terrible thing inside of me and around me. I lay awake, replaying the altar scene in my mind. The man's hands, the pastor's smile, the cold presence that had seemingly entered me. The feeling of something inside of me boiling over, the pain, and the beginning of a scream. And then I heard it, a whisper, faint and guttural from my own mouth. But it wasn't me speaking. It wasn't my voice. It wasn't English or the word hallelujah. It was something older, darker, like the sound of something massive choking up something vile, but I could understand it. "Not now," it said, from my own mouth. Not now, but soon. I froze, my body paralyzed as the words seemed to echo in the room and my mind. And then, just as suddenly, the voice, the feeling, was gone. I refused to go back to the church after that. Rejecting the faith of my family at such a young age tore my life apart. But I survived. I grew up. And over the following decades, I found peace, love, and my place in the wider world. Or I thought I had. But last night, as I was washing dishes, I started to gag, cough, and gasp for air. And I felt it again, rising up. The voice that wasn't a voice. The words that weren't words in any human language. They burned and tore at my chest and throat and spilled out into the empty air around me. "Really soon now," it said through me. with undisguised glee. The plate shattered in my hand, cutting deep into my palm. Cold dread rushed through me and then, somehow beyond me. Standing at my sink in my empty house, with blood welling up in my cupped palm, I realized I wasn't alone with the voice or the pain. Not really. I could feel them. The connection snapped into place, somehow simultaneously stabbing and tearing at me, a pain sharp, dull, and overwhelming, like a clawed finger pushing into the center of my mind, slicing, stretching, and flipping a switch. I knew all of them, the others, the ones who'd been there at the church when I was a boy. Their thoughts, their faces, their secrets, loves, and fears flooded my mind. They were scattered across the world. Most had moved on, healed, and built new lives just like me, but I knew at that moment, we all knew, that we were still marked and connected by the same terrible fate and bond. The voice was in them too, rising up, burning, tearing at us all. I could feel their fear, confusion, pain, mirroring my own, and a growing understanding of what was coming. A terrible, all-consuming compulsion building inside me, in all of us, pressing, urgent, and impossible to resist any longer. For death, destruction, chaos, glorious purpose, and hell on earth. The voice was rising up again, preparing to speak. In agony, I clawed at my face and throat, tearing at my collar in desperation, unintentionally smearing blood from my cut hand across my face, mouth, and neck. Blood, red, hot, salty, and so beautiful. On its own, my tongue lashed out impossibly long, flailing wildly at the air, lapping at the blood around my mouth and in my palm. It was unexpectedly delicious, sparking an explosion of pleasure in my injured hand, groin, chest, and head. A pleasure somehow shared with all the others, rapturous in its mounting intensity. Heavenly. "It's almost time," we all choked and gagged out in gleeful unison and hellish chorus, followed by horrible, wet sounds that burned in our chests, tore at our throats, and burst out of our mouths. Inhuman, monstrous, utterly insane sounds that we all recognized as laughter. "Don't let her fool you." I tilted my head as I read my mother's strange text. There was no context in a previous conversation or build-up to warrant the strange, cryptic message. I hadn't texted my mother in a few hours, and even then, it was to remind her to pick up dog food on her way home from church that night. "Who are we talking about?" I replied and waited. Nothing. My dog Lucy suddenly lifted her head before letting out a series of loud barks as she ran towards the front door. The unexpected loud noise caused me to jump in my seat. My dog stared at the door and barked intensely. The door's window looked obscured by the darkness of the night outside, like an inky veil hiding whatever was making my dog nervous just behind it. I slid off my gaming headphones and began approaching the door. As I stepped down the hallway towards the door, I felt a strange unease as I looked at the doorknob, unlocked. We always lock our doors once the sun sets, but with my parents gone and myself distracted by my game, the thought of doing so had escaped my mind. As I reached the door, I quickly moved my hand and locked it before flipping on the porch light. The curtain of darkness was pulled back to reveal an empty porch. I scanned what little of the yard I could see through the window, looking for any sign of movement in the darkness, but there was none. I shooshed my dog, assuming she was alerting over a bad dream or a reflection she saw in the window. She stopped barking, but remained alert, staring at the door with perked ears. I went around the house, locking the other two entrances before sitting back down on the couch. I took out my phone and looked down at my mother's message again. "Don't let her fool you." I clicked the call button. At this point, I was wondering if she had meant to send the message to someone else. If she hadn't, though, I wanted to know who the message was talking about and how they were trying to fool me. The phone rang a few times before going to voicemail. Lucy came over and sat down next to me, looking around the room with great unease. "What's gotten into you?" I said as I reached down and patted her head. Without warning, Lucy lurched to her feet and began barking intensely at the back door now. Startled, I tried calming her, but she refused to be pulled away or settled. "There is nothing out there," I said, as I ran my hand over the hackles across her back, her barking refusing to stop. I stepped to the door and pulled the string that opened the faux blinds that obscured the window. See, no one is there. I flipped on the light to the back porch to get a better view. As the light illuminated the porch, that was when I saw it on the door, something that was unnoticeable without the light from outside. A small round patch of fresh condensation on the outside of the window. I looked closer, not understanding at first what I was looking at or the implication it brought. I stepped back as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Something was just standing right outside my door. I jumped as I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. Taking it out, I could see a new text from my mother. "I need your help. I'll be home soon." I quickly began typing out a reply. "Mom, something weird is going on here. I think someone is walking around the house." After sending the message, I remembered the cameras my parents had installed on the four corners of the house. I figured if someone was sneaking around and looking for a way to break in, they would show up on the camera. The app buffered for a few seconds before opening to the live camera view. I sat surprised as I looked at the screen. 3 of the 4 cameras were offline. Confused, I opened the motion recording section of the app. Think perhaps the cameras caught something before going offline. Nothing. There wasn't a single recording on the app. It was as though all the footage had been deleted and the recording feature turned off. An even more eerie feeling began to creep over me. I gasped as I backed out to the live camera page. The last camera was now offline. I opened the phone app and hovered my thumb over the keypad, about to dial 911. It could be nothing. Just a dog acting strange, a random server issue with the cameras, and weird airflow causing the wet spot on the window. But I wasn't willing to take that kind of chance. If there was someone out there, then I needed someone here. I had just finished typing in the 3 numbers when a sharp series of knocks rang out from my front door. My heart sank and I flinched as Lucy ran back to the front door, letting out a new flurry of her aggressive barks. I stepped into the hallway and stared at the door. I could see the faint silhouette of a person standing on the porch, but any details were swallowed up by the darkness of the night. As I stared at the figure, I heard a voice coming through the door. "Sweetheart, it's me. Come open the door." The voice sounded familiar, but completely new at the same time. "Who's there?" I called out, taking a few steps down the hallway. "It's your mom, silly. I forgot my keys when I left for the store. I need you to open the door so I can get started on dinner." A cold chill ran down my spine. My mother has a unique voice. Whoever was standing on the other side of the door was trying to replicate it. Certain parts of the cadence were spot on, but little things just felt wrong. "My mother is at church," I called out. "I don't know who you are, but you need to leave now before I call the police." A thick silence filled the air as I waited for a response. "I picked up some cosmic brownies at the store. I know they are your favorite. Please come open the door for me." I don't know what disturbed me more in that moment, the way she ignored my threat and kept up the charade, or the fact that she knew my favorite snack. "I'm calling the police. You need to get..." Thud. The woman stepped up to the door and slammed her fist against it. I could see her better now. The light from inside the house shone through the window and illuminated her rage-filled eyes. Lucy barked more aggressively at the better view of the woman. Lucy was always standoffish to strangers, but the way that was acting was way more aggressive than I had ever seen her before. "You will open this door this instant!" she yelled, still trying to imitate my mother's voice. "I am your mother, and you will do as you're told." As I looked at the woman, a new sense of dread passed over me. The woman was not my mother, but she looked like her. She wore the same hairstyle, her head shape and nose looked the same. She was even wearing an outfit I could have sworn I had seen my own mother wear before. But she wasn't my mother. There were small details. Different ears, eyes slightly too far apart. The woman looked as though her and my mom could do the doppelganger trend together. At a passing glance, you might mistake the two, but I knew my mother. This wasn't her. I hit the call button on my phone and placed it to my ear as I stepped back further from the door. the quiet ringing sound music to my ears. "I'm calling the police now!" I yelled. "Get out of here!" Thud. Thud. The woman's fist slammed against the window of the door. "Open the damn door!" she screamed, no longer hiding behind the imitation. "You will listen to your mother, or I'll give you a reason to be afraid." The 911 operator picked up and asked me what the emergency was, her calm, questioning voice feeling inappropriate given the fear I was feeling in that moment. I quickly recited my address as the woman at the door began pounding on the door harder, screaming vile obscenities between calm moments where she would plead for me to open the door in a now shattered impression of the woman that raised me. "Please hurry," I pleaded. "She is really trying to get in now." Crack. My heart sank as I saw a small crack form around the woman's hand as it slammed against the door. Without leaving another second to pass, I turned and ran. This woman was getting in the house, and I needed to find a place to hide before it was too late. I ran to the kitchen. My head spun as I considered my options, my brain distracted by the woman's screaming and pounding mixed with Lucy's incessant barking. I grabbed a kitchen knife and ran to my parents' bedroom, turning off the lights as I ran to hide my movements. I went into their walk-in closet and tucked myself into the back corner, covered behind layers of my father's coats and shirts. My whole body jumped as I heard the window shatter, followed by a pained scream from the woman. "Look what you made me do!" she screamed before her voice suddenly calmed to a sickening sweet tone. "This cut is really bad, sweetheart. Can you bring me a Band-Aid?" "She's in the house," I whispered into the phone. The 911 operator instructed me to stay silent and in place while help was on the way. I could hear Lucy running around the house, barking wildly. She wasn't a small dog, but she wasn't the type to actually get violent if push came to shove. I could hear the woman walking around the house calling out for me in my mother's voice. "Sweetheart, this is all a misunderstanding. Come out and see me. Let me hold you." From the sound of it, she was looking around the kitchen and living room. "Lucy is acting really strange," she called out. "Maybe that diet we put her on has her acting weird. Come take a look at her for me." We had put Lucy on a special diet a few weeks before. We hadn't told anyone, but she knew. "You always did like playing hide-and-seek when you were little," she said as I heard her step into my parents' room. "Even when no one else was playing. Just come out and see me." I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I didn't breathe. I muted my phone so the operator's voice wouldn't be heard. I kept silent in crippling fear for my life. Every second an eternity. Every sound of an approaching footfall met with a further deepening pit in my stomach. "You were always so disobedient." She spoke softly, her voice stifling anger. "You were always my least favorite, but I still love you." I heard the clicking sound of the closet door as she turned the doorknob. "You should appreciate our family the way I do." I heard the door swing open. I could see flickers of light from the bedroom dance between the drapes that covered me. I knew any moment the horrid impersonator would pull back the clothes and kill me. I gripped the knife tighter. I have never been a fighter. I knew between my fear and lack of experience I didn't stand a chance. I would fight, but I knew I would fail. Her hauntingly soft voice filled the closet. "We'll have such lovely family time to get..." Her voice was cut off by the sounds of police sirens pulling down our road. She waited a moment and then sighed deeply. "So bad," she whispered before I heard her footsteps quickly retreating out of the room. I began to hyperventilate as I heard the police call out as they made their way into the house. I couldn't believe the ordeal was over. I walked in shock as the police led me through the house that was covered in the blood trail. Lucy followed us around, refusing to leave my side. I sent up a small prayer thanking God that the lady didn't do anything to Lucy besides scare her. The police took me outside and questioned me on the events while other police scoured the area trying to find the woman. They never did. When my parents arrived home, I clung to them and cried in my mother's arms. Through my labored cries, I asked the only question I could think to ask at that moment. Who was she? How did you know? My mother looked at me confused. "How did I know what, sweetheart?" "The woman. You sent those text messages." My mother's face went pale. I haven't had my phone all night. I forgot it when I went to church. It was in the house somewhere. I looked down at my phone while trying to grasp the terrifying facts of the situation. The woman had been in the house at some point without me even knowing it. Suddenly, my phone vibrated in my hand. A Facebook notification. My mother had tagged me in something. I opened the notification for my phone to take me to a small, simple post only a few seconds old. It was 2 pictures. The first was a family photo we had taken a few years ago when we went on vacation to Disney World. The second photo was a photo of me, standing at the front door, looking out the window. Above the photos was a small line of text that simply read, "I love my family. I'm going to start the story by saying that you should always be careful when running, even if it is in a popular place, or even if you have ran the trail a dozen times. It's always important to be aware of your surroundings." When I was in high school, I was an active runner. I would run every day after school, which allowed me to clear my head or just to get some clarity on things I had to decide. I had ran track on and off since middle school, so I could keep a good pace while running distance and even could run a pretty decent mile. This story takes place around the time I was a senior in high school, so there was a lot on my mind. Things like which college I was going to attend, or which colleges I could even get into, etc. Everything was changing pretty fast, and the amount of stress I had from school had finally gotten to me, so I had decided that I would go running in a park after school one day, just to give myself some time to think. The park was a pretty popular place. It had some really great trails, and it helped it wasn't far off from my house, so I ran there pretty often. I always had felt safe while running in the park, as I saw lots of people I knew and often always saw someone on the trails. There were some undeveloped areas you could run for some good scenic views where you could sometimes see deer and other animals. When I had gotten to the park, there were people there, but it wasn't as busy as usual, which didn't bother me, as I had a lot on my mind and needed some time to run and just think. I did all of the things I usually did, like stretch, and got ready to enter the woods. I put my headphones in, and the second I did, I blurred everything else out. I had started up my run with a nice light jog and passed some people and smiled like normal, until there was a man who greeted me with a smile that was extremely unsettling. If I had to describe it, I would say, imaging someone is looking down and they smile with no teeth while bringing their eyes up like in the movie Smile. It was creepy, but I nodded and waved like I normally would. I tried not to pay too much attention to the man and kept running as I was at a public park, and it wasn't unusual to see people. I had maybe ran a few laps around the common park area and kept passing the man in the same area, which struck me as weird as I had ran laps and not little ones either, like laps that took 5 to 8 minutes. Every time I would pass, I would politely nod and keep running. After a while, though, I started to think more and more about the situation. I began wondering why the man hadn't moved much from the original area I saw him in. At this point, I started seeing less and less people on the main trails, and it became later in the afternoon. The sun was covering in the clouds, and although it hadn't set, it was getting darker and gloomy as if a storm were coming. It was late April, so it was hot and rainy pretty frequently, and I decided that I would run a little bit longer until it started to rain, then I would head back to my car. I ran past the main parking lot and noticed that my car was the only car parked in the lot. So I knew I was alone and figured everyone knew the rain was coming and decided to leave. I ran toward the entrance and re-entered the running paths, passing the original place I had saw the man, and he was gone. I slowed down, catching my breath, and walked slightly for a few minutes, deeper and deeper in the trail. I was gathering my thoughts when I felt the feeling of being watched. I took my headphones out, and when I did, the park was silent. Scary. Silent. You couldn't hear trees blowing in the wind or cars from the main road. You could only hear the sound of my breath and the music blasting from my headphones. I looked around and didn't notice anything, so I kept walking, this time remaining vigilant as I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. As I was walking, I had my head down, and when I brought it up, I noticed the man from earlier walking in my direction, except this time, he wasn't smiling. He looked agitated, so I didn't even bother to smile or wave. I kept my head down, but noticed he was in jeans, boots, and a long-sleeved shirt. Something I hadn't noticed earlier. It wasn't unusual for someone to be wearing that, but it was in the low 80s and humid from rain days prior, so I knew he had to be hot. I kept walking for a minute, hoping that I was in the clear, and when I made it probably 20 feet away, I turned around to see where he had went, and to my surprise, he turned around also, walking in my direction. I picked up my pace a little and started jogging, leaving my headphones out this time. Every step I took, I heard more behind me. I glanced back and noticed the man jogging as well. I thought to myself, jogging in jeans, boots, and a long sleeve? I was so deep into the trail, though, that I was equidistant to both the start and finish. And if I kept going, that I would loop around to my car without having to turn around, but every step took me deeper and deeper into the woods further away from the main road. And although it seems dumb, I knew I could not have ran past the man if he was planning on doing something I didn't want to find out. I had close to a mile left on the trail, but every time I would pick up the pace, so would he. I kept hoping that he would stop to take a breath, but he never did. I tried to rationalize it, but I couldn't, especially since every time I picked up the pace, he was quick to as well. The area was much darker now, and the rain had started pouring. I was now drenched, and as I took a look back, the man was even closer than before. He was gaining on me, and I knew that I had to make a fast decision, so I went for it, in hopes that if he was following me, he wouldn't calculate my next move. I was approaching a scenic dip-off trail that had been overgrown and covered by leaves and sticks, leading downward on a slope like a tall hill. People had stopped running down it because of how steep it was, but it cut right down the main loop, saving probably 1/3 of the remainder. At this point, the only people who really knew about it were the people who had ran it before it became overgrown. I picked up my pace as fast as I could, running straight forward on the main path, and covered my face with my arms, cutting a sharp left, running through the twigs, vines, and leaves. I heard an audible gasp, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps. I ran down the hill as fast as I could, hoping that I had made a right decision, too afraid to look back until I reached the bottom of the hill. I had put a good distance between us, and when I turned around for the last time there, he was standing at the top of the hill, looking down at me, breathing heavily, looking annoyed and angry, like he was on the verge of a psychotic break. He was breathing heavily, covered in rain, and just staring at me with such anger. I didn't stick around and ran as fast as I could toward my car, hoping that when I got to my car, the story would end there. But when I approached my car, I quickly jumped into it, pulling out of the parking lot as fast as I could. I looked in the rear view, noticing the man on the edge of the woods staring, and it immediately sent chills down my spine as there were no other cars in the parking lot. I was shaking the whole car ride home, and was too afraid to tell my parents, because if they knew, they wouldn't let me run again, and that was my only form of solitude. I laid in bed all night in fear, thinking about his unsettling smile and how creepy he was. I thought about how I should have known something was wrong sooner. I finally fell asleep after replaying all of the scenarios in my head and was woken up at 3 a.m. by my stepdad, who had just gotten home from work. I heard him enter the house in a panic, screaming for me, and when I sat up, he came into my room asking if I was okay, and when I asked why, he pointed outside. I quickly went outside to see my car door opened, and my car had been gone through, seats slashed and a busted back window. I was confused as nothing had been stolen, but just to destroy my car was strange. I started thinking about who would do something like that, or why. We lived in a secluded area with only 2 neighbors, which lived far enough from us to allow us to be loud and have gatherings, but close enough to run to in case of an emergency, so nobody had heard anything. Aside from the glass and cut seats, the only thing sitting on my seat was my registration. It suddenly dawned on me that when I had ran to my car earlier that day, that I jumped straight in and took off. I didn't unlock my car. It was older, so it had to be manually locked and unlocked with a key, but I didn't unlock it. I knew it had to be the man from earlier. He must have looked at the registration and gotten my name and address from it. I moved to college shortly after, and my family sold the house when I was in college, but it still makes me wonder what else he would have done if he would have gotten me, or even worse, broken into my house.